Thank you. First of all, I would like to ask for apologies. So far, I have received apologies from Councillors Batchelor, Cuffley, Hickford, Joseph, Hertford and Wells. Do we have any more apologies that anyone is aware of? I'm not hearing anything, so I'm taking that as no. First item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of the meeting of the Council held on the 17th of July 2018. Council is asked to agree these as a correct record. Is everybody happy with the minutes? I will sign the minutes. Thank you. I now have a few announcements to make. I shall read out. Firstly, I would like to welcome members of the public to this meeting of the Council. You are very welcome, and I hope that you find this meeting of interest. The Council supports the principle of transparency and encourages filming, recording and taking photographs at its meetings that are open to the public. Members are advised that this meeting may therefore be filmed, recorded or photographed. This meeting is being live streamed to the web and the County Council's YouTube channel. I would like to highlight this to members of the public that they may be filmed as part of this meeting and that this will appear on the web. Please can I ask all members and members of the public to turn their mobile phones to silent or vibrate whilst the meeting is taking place. I would like to welcome newly elected Councillor Mark Goldsack to the Council meeting. I am sure that the Council would like to join me in congratulating Noel Godfrey, Director of the Connecting Cambridgeshire and Smart Cambridgeshire programmes, led by Cambridgeshire County Council, who has been voted one of the top 10 female GovTech leaders in the UK. The inaugural ranking by GovTech leaders spotlights influential women across the public sector who are leaders, trailblazers and transformers. I am pleased to announce that Cambridgeshire County Council Energy Investment Unit School Programme was nominated for a Department for Education Schools Energy Efficiency Award. We recently heard from DFE that our programme has been selected as a runner-up for this award. May I pass my congratulations to the team involved. I am pleased to confirm that the Ely Southern Bypass will open on the 31st of October 2018. The new road will connect the A142 at Angel Grove to Stuntley Causeway and has been a much wanted scheme for well over 20 years. Finally, I was honoured to welcome His Royal Highness the Duke of Gloucester to Cambridgeshire recently on behalf of the County Council, when His Royal Highness visited the Oasis Community Centre and Nursery in Wisbech. Whilst in Wisbech, His Royal Highness also visited the site for the People and Animals Community Farm, where he planted the first tree, at the parish church of St Augustine, where a memorial plaque was unveiled in memory of those from Wisbech who lost their lives during the First World War. I was also honoured to welcome the Duke of York to Cambridge on Thursday the 4th of October 2018, when His Royal Highness attended a Pitch at the Palace boot camp at the Cambridge Judge Business School Entrepreneurship Centre. That concludes the announcements for today. Next is item 3 and the report from the County Returning Officer. The Council has already noted the election of Councillor Mark Goldsack in the by-election for the Solne North and Isleham electoral division held on the 4th of October 2018. So we move on to the next item. Next is item 4, which is an item on declarations of interest. Under this item, members are asked to declare interest under the Code of Conduct in any item on the agenda for today's meeting if they are not registered on the Register of Interests. May I have any declarations of interest now, please? If when going through you think you should declare an interest, please feel free to do it at that time. Next, we have item 5, which is public question time, which allows members of the public to ask questions at the council meeting, provided that they have given advance notice. No questions were notified by the deadline, so we move on to the next item, which is item 6 is on petitions and allows members of the public to present petitions in accordance with the agreed protocol. No petitions were received, so we move on to the next item. Before I proceed with the agenda, can I remind you about the audio and voting system? In order to register to speak, you need to press the silver button. You will then be automatically added to my list of speakers. If you have a point of order, this means that there has been an alleged breach of the council rules or procedure or law, so I will need the member to indicate the rule or law which he or she considers has been broken. Or personal explanation. This may only relate to some material part of an earlier speech by the member which may appear to have been misunderstood in the present debate. You need to raise your hand. Do not press the button. We now move to item 7. We have one item for determination. The item relates to the Shared Services Section 113 agreement, which was discussed by General Purposes Committee on the 20th of September 2018. Can I please ask the Chairman of the General Purposes Committee, Councillor Count, to move the recommendations as set out on the Council agenda, and I understand Councillor Bates will be seconding. Thank you. Can I ask if there are any questions? Would anybody like to raise anything? First of all, I will clearly ask Councillor Count to speak to the report.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, this is the protocol for moving forwards with any future shared work with Peterborough City Council. It is clear that we've already taken advantage of some of the opportunities that have been presented to us, but these have been on an ad hoc basis rather than an organised structural approach. So those opportunities that we can see, for example, our Chief Executive, Gillian Beasley, Wendy Oglebam, Liz Robin, are just 3 examples. But actually, if we're going to do much more of this, which seems to be a very good and very beneficial direction of travel, then we need a more structured approach. So there's been a number of workshops that put together the extensive document that went in front of General Purposes Committee, looking at should we wish to increase the shared back office functions, reducing leadership costs, maximising purchasing power, as well as reducing estate costs, reducing duplication of systems and processes, and perhaps building resilience through shared teams, shared systems and processes. Then we need a more structured way to do this. So the paper went to the GPC, it was widely supported. There are no actual proposals inside the papers. Those proposals must come forward at a later date using the protocol to go through the appropriate committee or delegated structure to move forward with further shared arrangements. So I thoroughly endorse this. I can reflect that the GPC endorsed this and was voted through in a everybody voted for it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Count. Councillor Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everybody. The origins of this move, I guess, go back to October 14, when Steve moved a motion in this chamber encouraging us to look at more possibilities of partnership working, etc., in order to reduce costs and do other good things as well. And then October 17, we had another motion from Councillor Downs, who's somewhere behind me, asking that we look seriously at options for unitary working. And the Chief Executive was going to report back in 6 months, but she duly did 12 months ago, and put this now on the table of the Mayor to review as a part of his deliberations. That's now 12 months, we've heard nothing. If we really are going to make good steps forward in terms of rationalising local government, saving money and being more accountable directly to the citizens of Cambridgeshire, we could do with a bit of action there. So perhaps, Chair, somebody may wish to take that forward and show evidence that this work is proceeding. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jenkins. Noted. Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Chair. Our group does support this, of course, but I simply wanted to raise one aspect in terms of joint working, and that is that my understanding is that some of the salaries of people who are in Cambridgeshire are set at a lower rate than those who are in Peterborough, and this is with social workers, my information is, are being paid $5,000 less. Now, we are not holding on to social workers, and we need to hold on to them, but if there are these discrepancies or differences in incomes and salaries, then this is something that ought to be looked at in the context of the joint working. So I simply draw that to full Council's attention.
Thank you. Councillor Downs.
Without any way disagreeing with the intention of the proposal, I'd like to know what consideration GPC gave to the personal pressure and workload for those who are expected to do these dual roles.
Thank you. I have no further speakers. Sorry, I have no further speakers. I'll therefore... Councillor Bates, would you like to say anything, or are you happy? Therefore, I will ask Councillor Count to sum up, and then we will go to a vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. There were 3 points raised. The one was about public sector reform and work on unitary status. So the Combined Authority has a distinct role in public sector reform and moving that forwards at the moment. They have decided to focus on the first and primary task is the further integration of health and social care. Now, the reason that that has such a high priority is it's clear that that is the biggest ticket item in terms of finances that moves through this county as a whole, both in terms of NHS budget and our budget. So it's absolutely right that that took first priority in terms of work moving forward. It's moving forward with support from Res Publica, a very well-respected individual called Philip Blond, and discussions with government. And we look forward to seeing that work evolve, to see what may come in front of us and in front of the health system and in front of government at a later date once those proposals have been fully fleshed out. In terms of further public sector reform work, Andy Wood, who led as chair on the discussions for devolution with government, perhaps better corralled us into a room and assisted us with our devolution discussions when we was discussing with Norfolk and Suffolk at the same time, has been appointed by the CPCA to set up his own independent board to look independently at public sector reform and what we do and don't wish to engage with, what is best for the people of Cambridgeshire, rather than those of us with sovereign interests trying to pursue our own interests. This will be handled in a much more independent way, and we look forward to seeing what will come out with that. In terms of the second statement, which was the payment structures of Peterborough and Cambridgeshire, that's all handled in the protocol as to how salaries would be paid, how it's handled, how sovereign the two respective bodies remain throughout this entire journey. So that does have a lot of work in the body of the work. And in terms of the third one, the personal pressures that Councillor Downs mentioned, I wholly endorse your concerns, and I have raised it repeatedly to check, double check and triple check with my chief executive and others that we've got this right. The last thing we want to do is try and appoint to too thin a structure that can handle the workload. However, when we started on this journey, just to remind you some of the reasons why it does work so well, is say somebody like Wendy and Wendy's role, Wendy and the Cambridgeshire counterpart would be going to the same meetings a lot of the time, representing two different bodies with two different strategies that do exactly the same thing, and translating that into one role actually hasn't changed the workload in a lot of areas very much, because they're still going to the same meetings discussing one strategy and same thing. So at the very senior level, this has not massively changed the workload. And of course, in all cases, we are trying to backfill underneath to ensure that the differences that do evolve are fully looked after. But I do have concerns for the staff welfare and do raise that on a number of occasions, just to check that we've got this right, because it's vitally important. It's not just about money, it is about resilience, it is about sharing, it is ultimately about ending up with a better structure that's able to deliver for the people of Cambridgeshire and in this case of Peterborough as well. So thank you very much, Chairman. I hope everybody will support this.
Thank you. There appears to be nobody speaking against, so I will therefore take the vote by show of hands. Is everybody in favour? I do think that's pretty much unanimous, but I will check. Are there anybody against? Abstentions? Okay. Next is item 8, recommendations to full council from the Constitution and Ethics Committee. We have 3 reports. The first report is on page 7 to 33. Can I ask the Chairman of the Constitution and Ethics Committee, Councillor Maguire, to move that the recommendation as set out in the report be adopted, and Vice Chairman Councillor Reynolds to second, please.
Chairman, I am pleased to move the recommendation as set out in the report.
Thank you. I have no speakers, no questions being asked. I will therefore take the vote by show of hands. Is everybody in favour? Sorry? I'm taking them all separately. Okay? We're talking about the first report. Is everybody in favour as set out in the report? Nobody against? I'm taking that as a unanimous vote. Anybody against? I will check. Nobody? Okay. No abstentions. Oh, sorry, I thought I was. The second report on pages 34 to 40. Can I ask the Chairman of the Constitution and Ethics Committee, Councillor Maguire, to move that the recommendations as set out in the report be adopted, and the Vice Chairman, Councillor Reynolds, to second? And I understand you are accepting an amendment or an addition.
Again. Chairman, I'm pleased to move the recommendations as set out in the report, but as you say, I would like to propose as Chairman of the Constitution and Ethics through you to the Council that we actually accept an alteration. This follows an input from Councillor Singer. The changes at the top of page 36, where it shows in italics and in brackets, any decision to exceed the limit in exceptional circumstances will be at the discretion of the Council Chairwoman, and that is to delete in exceptional circumstances. So through you, Chairman, I'd like our Council to accept that.
Thank you very much. Can I ask then that members with that small addition are happy with the report? Whatever, change. Is everybody in favour? Is anybody against? Any abstentions? Thank you. That's therefore carried. The third report on pages 41 to 43. Can I please ask the Chairman of the Constitution and Ethics Committee, Councillor Maguire, to move that the recommendations as set out in the report be adopted, and the Vice Chairman, Councillor Reynolds, to second, please.
Chairman, again, I am pleased to move the recommendation as set out in the report.
I say second, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. I have no speakers. I'm therefore taking everybody as happy. Can I show, is everybody in favour? Take it by acclamation. Is anybody against? Any abstentions? Thank you. Next is item 9, the appointment of the Council's Monitoring Officer. Sorry, but can I please ask Fiona Macmillan to leave the meeting for this item? Sorry, Councillor Giles, yeah?
I'd like a point of clarification and explanation. I'm sure that many of us have received a letter from Mike Mason via email.
Do you want to wait till it's...
Yeah? I think it went to all members, the Chairman.
Yeah. I haven't. I understand that I've sort of caught sight of it, but I haven't received it. I am going to... Sort of the next paragraph might explain, I am going to use my Chairman's discretion under section 100B4 of the Local Government Act to to allow this?
Yeah, but it's the time scale.
Hang on a minute, let me introduce, the report has to be introduced, which we will do. Then if you have something to raise,
come
we'll
back to
raise it then. Thank you very much. The interviews for this position took place on Thursday the 11th of October. I am therefore aware that this report was not available for public inspection 5 clear days in advance of the meeting. However, I am proposing to exercise my discretion under section 100B(4) of the Local Government Act 1972 to allow discussion of this report, as the Council has a duty to designate one of its officers to be known as the Monitoring Officer. Can I please therefore ask the Chairman of the Staffing and Appeals Committee, Councillor Schumann, to move that the recommendation as set out in the report be adopted, and the Vice Chairman, Councillor Hudson, to second, please.
Happy to move, Chairman.
Happy to second, Madam Chair. Yes, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I ask Councillor Schumann now to speak to his report? Speak to the report, please.
Thank you, Chairman, and I hope that I will be able to respond to Councillor Giles's questions and queries raised. As part of my introduction, I wish to highlight to members of this Council and to members of the public that if we approve the recommendations today, then it is important to note the appointment of Fiona Macmillan will be subject to the normal employment processes, in that if Fiona confirms acceptance of the role, then Fiona will resign from her current role in LGSS law, and after which Fiona will take the new role of Director of Legal and Governance and Monitoring Officer. It is anticipated that this will conclude on the 1st of November, and I welcome the expeditious manner in which this has been handled. I thank you, Chairman, for using your discretion in allowing this report to come, although it hasn't had the 5-day clearance. The period in which we've had an acting monitoring officer should be, and I hope all members would agree, kept as short as possible, and I'll be welcoming Fiona in her new role if she so accepts. By way of formal introduction to the paper, Chairman, I'm delighted to propose the recommendations and note Councillor Count's earlier comments in Agenda Item 7 about building resilience and capacity across both councils. Although the savings in this paper are relatively small to Cambridgeshire, it is also worth noting the important benefits about building a better service with regard to legal and governance at Cambridgeshire County Council. Happy to propose the recommendations, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Schumann. Do I have any speakers on this item? Councillor Downs.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. I think it will be of interest to the Council to know that there were only 2 applicants for this post. And I think that is a very significant indication of the uncertainty that surrounds the public sector work at this moment. This is a very important post, a very senior post. I'm not in any sense casting aspersions about the quality of the successful applicants, but I think we ought to be aware of what is happening, that we are having a very limited field. And that, if I were an employer, I would be very concerned about only having that field to choose from.
Councillor Scott.
Thank you. I simply wanted to raise the issue about transparency to the public, and that I accept that you as Chair have reduced the period during which this report comes to full Council, but there are those out there in the public arena who have been concerned about the matter, and I do believe that it's such an important role that it would have been preferable had the material gone up on the website in the required time under the Constitution. That's one. Number 2, we were given assurances at Constitution and Ethics that the officer would be independent of LGS, and I applaud that. The third point is that everybody within this chamber must be aware of the concerns that there are about LGSS, and therefore I can simply say that there are a number of reasons why we required the assurance that the monitoring officer be separate and independent from that body. So the Labor group does support this, but I simply raise those matters because they have been articulated as concerns out there in the public arena to which we are responsible. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kindersley.
Thank you, Chairman. We actually have two separate items at agenda item 9 to consider. The first is the decision of the Staffing and Appeals Committee, and the second is to actually formally appoint a human being to the post. And it is that I would actually like to focus on, in that Fiona Macmillan has not only been working in and around this authority for some time, but in a previous life worked for South Cambridge District Council, where I think many of us probably got to know her well. And I have to say, from a personal perspective, how utterly delighted I am that she has been put forward to this appointment, and I hope that other members will join me in welcoming her to this position at Cambridgeshire County Council, because she is a cracking good person and she will do a fantastic job.
Thank you. I have no other speakers. Councillor Schumann, would you like to say anything further?
Very briefly, Chairman, just to respond to Councillor Downs and comment that I also note the number of applicants, but I'm glad you caveated a comment that this does not diminish the quality of our appointment, and thank Councillor Kindersley for highlighting the human aspect of this report, which I'm sure we'll all look forward to welcoming Fiona in due course. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. I have nobody speaking against the appointment, so I will therefore ask if everybody is in the favour that we appoint Fiona Macmillan as the monitoring officer. That is unanimous. Just check, is there anybody against? Any abstentions? Can you please ask Fiona to come back in? We will just wait till Fiona comes in and gets in her seat. She's come back.
Well done.
Thank you. You can take it from that, you know, they accepted the recommendation. Next is item 10, the Audit and Accounts Committee Annual Report, included on your council agenda at pages 44 to 50. Can I please ask Councillor Mike Shellens to move receipt of the report, please?
Madam Chairman, members, I hope to be relatively quick, as I recognise that I'm really only the warm-up act for Terry Rogers' incisive report on the pensions items, which comes next. I have an ongoing concern about press reports of the failure of companies who suddenly reveal a financial black hole, usually followed by a mudslinging confrontation with their external auditor, and our committee is charged with managing the county's risk. We would very much prefer not to find ourselves making similar headlines, and so we get regular reports from internal audit that our systems are sound. I hope I am right in taking comfort from that. You will see from the report that para 1.4 lists key responsibilities of our committee. Notwithstanding my deep gratitude to internal audit under the avuncular control of Duncan Wilkinson and the workers headed by Neil Hunter and Mairead Claydon, I am most concerned about the last bullet point, namely to ensure that the Council has an adequate and effective internal audit function. My concern is one of capacity in the middle of a major transformation programme. Such things inevitably lead to a mass exodus of experience and institutional memory, with many survivors having new duties thrust upon them. With the best will in the world, I have no qualms on that score. Mistakes are inevitable. Change is dangerous. Then you add in that finance have had 2 months arbitrarily slashed off their timescales for producing the statutory accounts, and I'm most grateful to those responsible for almost doing the almost impossible to almost impossible timescales. I had to think about that sentence. Yet another area of concern. And finally, as if this wasn't enough, 2 major unexpected reviews have been required. ERP, of which I know little, except that there are times when it is terribly slow, and community transport, with its 76 areas for investigation and follow-up. An irritation I've experienced is that the word overspend has been washed clean by finance parlance and replaced by pressure. To me, the factors I have outlined already create an enormous pressure for internal audit. And as I resist the finance redefinition of the English language, so I should come clean to you and call it what it is, a dangerous overload for the resources that are seeking to ensure we do things with economy, efficiency, and effectiveness. So internal audit had presented to us their list of projects to be undertaken over the next few months to give us confidence that we will be safe. To make room for these new major items of work, that list has had to be pruned. We must all hope that this will not turn out to have serious implications. In closing, I must give my grateful thanks to the members of the committee and particularly mention the 3 subs who had to prepare for a 6-hour meeting about the 288-page PKF report on community transport, and also my gratitude to Rob Sanderson, who has still not given up on his aspiration to keep me under some semblance of control. As for the rest, you have the report in front of you, and I'm happy to try and answer if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you turn your microphone off, please? Thank you. I have nobody wishing to speak. I will therefore take the report as noted. Thank you, Councillor Shellings. Next is item 11, the Pension Fund Committee Annual Report, included in your council agenda on pages 51 to 58. Can I please ask Councillor Terry Rogers, Chairman of the Pension Fund Committee, to move receipt of the report?
Thank you, Mike, for that welcome. Much appreciated. A very short introduction to the report, if I may. The last quarter, the fund returned 5.9%, which outperformed the benchmark by 0.02%, which I think is a good progress. Talking of progress, many people ask me what is the value of the fund as it now stands. But if I tell you in 2008, the fund actually stood at 58%, and now by careful management, and I have to attach a lot of credence to Roger for his stalwart work in this, as of June the 18th, the fund stood at 86%. So I think that's quite good as we're standing. There are many funds working at 100%. We've discussed whether we should try and aim for that or not, and I believe we're looking at it, but we'll discuss it further. Again, many people ask me again, what is the breakdown of our fund? What does it comprise? Well, we have equity, we have property, we have alternatives, and we have fixed income. By fixed income, I mean bonds. By equity, I mean global equity, which stands at the current time at 57% of the fund. UK equity, 14% of the fund, and that's important when people start asking questions about Brexit. You attach the two together. Infrastructure, 3%, private equity, 6%, secured loans, 2%, and property, 8%, mainly in the form of Schroeder Property Management Trust. Turning now to another subject, which is access, and many people have heard of access. Please don't ask me what the acronym stands for. It was produced out of the air as far as I can understand. We're about to put 2 funds into the pool. One is J.O. Hambro, and the other one is Dodge and Cox. To qualify, they each have to be valued at 500 million or more. And those 2 actually do qualify. It's being done in 3 tranches. The first tranche has already been submitted by other members of the access pool, and they include people like Kent, Hampshire, Sussex, West Sussex, East Sussex, and others, not forgetting, of course, the Isle of Wight, a very important contributor with 800 million total funding. The operator has been appointed as Link, and we're currently looking for a contract manager, and we're setting up an administration team as well. Coming back to Brexit and risk management, people keep asking me, what are we doing? And I keep rubbing this thing here. And it's not telling me, I'm afraid. It's let me down quite considerably. But what I would say with risk management, there are several what I would call instruments or management tools we have in place. And we're currently undertaking a very detailed study, and as you can see by this particular booklet, it's quite large, into this problem with equities, and I'm concentrating on equities. And we have equity protection, we have synthetic market exposure, excuse me reading these because I can never get them up here, liability-driven instruments and currency hedging, and those are the 4 basically management tools we have to work with. And in November, we will be holding a subcommittee meeting and deciding which avenue we're going to follow in that particular instance. All of these, of course, come at a cost, and that's another thing we must look at very carefully. The decision, as I said, will be made in early November. I'm happy now to take any questions, bearing in mind most of our discussions are in confidence, but if you have any questions, I'll try and answer them if I can. Thank you.
Thank you. I have nobody registered to speak. I will therefore... Oh, sorry, you just didn't catch you. Councillor Peter Downs.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank Terry for the work you do on this committee. You gave us two figures, 56% and 86%, I think. I think it would be helpful if people know percentage of what, because most of the members of the council do not have the privilege of sitting on the pension fund committee, therefore they might be puzzled by those two figures.
Can you please put your microphone on, Councillor Rogers?
This is the total value in what we'll call a common comparison of what funding is required by our fund, set by the actuary. So he tells us what we need. We're making 56% of that in 2008. We've now raised that to 86% this year, 2018. So it's what the actuary determines, how our fund, where it should stand, and that's where we've achieved. That's any use to you, Peter.
Thank you. I now have no further speakers. I will therefore take the report as noted. Thank you, Councillor. Next is item 12, the Cambridgeshire Local Pension Fund Board Annual Report, included in your council agenda on pages 59 to 79. Can I please ask Councillor Simon King, Chairman of the Cambridgeshire Local Pension Fund Board, to move receipt of the report?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, it's a great honour and privilege to present this report because I think we function very well as a board, and that's down to very good support from our officers and also very active and informed participation from the members of the board. Some of you might be a little confused about the two roles. The committee is the more important, if you like, of the two. The board is really very much in an advisory role, so the decision-making is done by the committee. Having said that, it is a statutory requirement that we have a board, and it's been a very steep learning curve for me, and I'm happy to answer questions. I'm afraid I don't have any of the good props that Councillor Rogers managed to conjure. Don't even have a rabbit to bring out of the hat on this occasion. But yes, I'm also very happy to welcome Councillor Machini to the board. You'll see in the report it lists Councillor Manning. He has left the board and Councillor Machini is now on there. This report actually ends in April of this year, and so we've got about a 6-month gap. And I believe that we have a well-run fund, and I believe that we have a strong position. We do have a number of different organisations that are members of our pension fund, and we provide a very important service to a lot of people, not just in the county council. So just to say thank you again to all of those people who have supported the work of the board, and I'll try and answer any questions, but not too difficult ones, I hope. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor King. I have no questions. I have nobody raising their hands. I will therefore take the report as noted. Thank you, Councillor King. Next is item 13, appointments to outside organisations. I propose to move as chairman the recommendation as set out in the tabled report. However, I understand there is a change to the council substitution member on the combined authority. I therefore propose to also move that Councillor Bates temporarily replaces Councillor Hickford as the council substitute member on the combined authority. Can I please ask Councillor Maguire to second, please?
Pleased to second both proposals, Chairman.
Thank you. Can I please ask by show of hands if everybody's happy with that? I see nobody against, or is anybody against? Any abstentions? No. Next is item 14, written motions. 4 motions have been submitted. The first motion has been submitted by Councillor Susan van der Ven. Can I please ask Councillor van der Ven to move and speak to her motion as set out in pages 2 and 3 of the council agenda? I also understand that Councillor Whitehead is seconding. and reserving your right to speak, I take it. Councillor van der Ven.
Thank you. One of the most important occasions to take place in this chamber is the UK Citizenship Ceremony. To take part, you must have passed the UK Citizenship Test, which consists of multiple choice questions drawn from this book, Life in the United Kingdom. While the questions sound simple, passing the test is not easy. I invite you to try. Can you name the 9 ingredients of the Ulster fry? How many members does a jury have in Scotland? Page 63 describes the British government's invitation to people from Europe and elsewhere around the world to come and help rebuild this country after World War II, plugging gaps in the workforce. The citizenship ceremony today is testament to the fact that people from Europe and elsewhere continue to support our economy and workforce, helping us as nurses, crop pickers, teachers, cleaners, and inventors. But with the decline in key sectors of our workforce even before Brexit, government is now rather desperately spending millions on new international recruitment programs to fill critical gaps in health and social care, as our own health committee has been hearing. The impetus for my motion today is government's failure to come up with a fit-for-the-future Brexit plan that protects and supports our people, our workforce, and our economy going forward, and the direct implications for Cambridgeshire and this council, whose overwhelming responsibility is social care. I asked our Chief Finance Officer if Brexit is an opportunity or a risk. It is absolutely a risk. Brexit is already impacting on our care providers due to fluctuations in the value of the pound. It is less advantageous for migrant workers to come here. Here's one international recruitment agency's listing for a night support worker in Cambridgeshire. £8.41 to £9.49 per hour. Main duties include continence management, using manual handling equipment as specified. Be flexible, adaptive, and creative. Perks, collection from, but not back to, the airport. £15 per night allowance. These are low-skilled jobs not protected in any Brexit proposal so far, even though our aging population is arguably our most pressing problem. The CEO of a dementia care home in my village told me, our biggest challenge right now is recruitment, with agency usage at an all-time high, meaning higher staffing costs. Local authority fees are not keeping pace with these wage rises. We really struggle to source carers and ancillary workers. This type of work needs support from Eastern European countries to fill the gaps. And what about Brexit supporting the Cambridgeshire economy? An independent green grocer asked me, how long can my flowers, fruit, and veg sit in a port waiting for customs checks before they wilt and need to be dumped? A printing business owner told me, paper cost has risen by 16% since the referendum. Will I now lose my European markets? A local fruit farmer says, a 15% drop in my workforce already has meant we need to pull back on our signature crop, the Victoria plum. A big high-tech company lists the things it needs government to urgently sort out. Medicine regulation, frictionless movement of goods, maintaining UK involvement in EU life sciences, post-Brexit rights for EU citizens. These examples do at least provide new possible questions for the citizenship test. For example, what is the customs union? How does the single market work? True or false, the NHS will get £350 million per week extra if we leave the EU. Since the referendum, it has been demonstrated very painfully that extricating our workforce and economy from the EU is a damaging thing to do. With not long to go before EU exit day, government has worked out no deal at all, let alone one that is better than the deal we've already got. Is this good for Cambridgeshire? It would appear not. Given the slow-motion wreck that government is leading us into, why shouldn't the care home, the greengrocer, the high-tech company, and you and I be given a say in the all-important terms of Brexit that will shape the future for our children and grandchildren? Cambridgeshire MPs Heidi Allen and Daniel Zeichner have already declared their support for a people's vote, as has South Cambridgeshire District Council. Please support this motion.
Councillor Vandervent, well done for timing. Spot on. Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chairman. I have to say, I think this is the worst motion I've ever seen come before this chamber. 544 MPs voted in Parliament to hand this decision to remain or leave the EU to the British people. And in the run-up to the referendum in June 2016, the Remain supporting government sent a booklet to every single household in Britain. There was a page in that booklet, and it was entitled, "A Once-in-a-Generation Decision." And it says, "This is your decision. The government will implement what you decide." 17.4 million people voted to leave. 16.1 million people voted to stay. It was the single largest democratic mandate ever returned in British history. 498 MPs then went on to vote to give notice to the EU under Article 50 to leave the European Union. And democracy means that sometimes you must bow to the will of the people, even if you disagree that will is something that you just can't agree with. We're leaving the European Union on the 29th of March, and the country and this chamber, regardless of how any individual in here voted, should unite behind the government in the national interest, and we should send a strong and united message to Brussels to help our Prime Minister deliver the best possible deal for this country. This motion is against the national interest, and it's an assault on our democracy, and I certainly won't be supporting it.
Thank you. Councillor Tierney.
I'm a little puzzled. When I've raised the matter of Brexit more locally over in Finland, Liberal Democrats have suggested to me that it's not a matter for local politicians. It's a matter for government. I shouldn't even be raising it. Certainly shouldn't be questioning their potential candidates about it. And yet here we have a motion doing exactly that. So I think it's interesting the different take at either end of the county. I represent an area which is one of the highest votes for Brexit in the country, and I'm proud to do so. The people of Wisbech voted very strongly to leave the European Union, and I've got to tell you, a great many of our Eastern European neighbours would have done so if they could as well. Support the policy, you'd be surprised. I would like to say that the scaremongering that's done, I think, you know, there are people all over the world, there are countries that trade with other countries that are not part of the European Union. These problems are resolvable. I do accept that we will have some, but I've got to say that I think we made the right decision. I will not be supporting this motion today. We must see democracy done. I think it would be disastrous for us to turn our back on that decision that's been taken now in any way. And when we leave next year, which we will, I will be partying like it's 1999. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hunt. Councillor Tierney, can you turn your microphone off, please? Councillor Hunt, if you put your microphone on, and then Councillor Peter-Topping will be added back in.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I've got a certain age, and therefore I feel I should apologise to the people of Cambridgeshire, because I voted, I was an ill-informed 29-year-old in 1975. I didn't know the facts. I was a 29-year-old and I listened to what I was told in the papers. And I voted to stay in the European Common Market because I believed in the free exchange of goods and services, and I thought students should be able to travel between Paris and London. But I was ill-informed, and so I think now it would be absolutely reasonable for another referendum to discuss whether or not our joining the European Union was, if everybody knew what they were talking about at the time. So let's have another referendum and decide whether we were right to even join in the first place. Had I not made this mistake and voted to join the common market, we wouldn't have had a limit on the power of our vacuum cleaners. We wouldn't have had ridiculous laws saying that we had to have straight bananas. We wouldn't have had ever bigger heavy goods vehicles rattling through our villages and destroying them. So I apologise that I made this dreadful mistake. If you were successful in reversing the people's decision, it would be a vote against our treasured democracy. I, of course, will vote against this ridiculous motion that, if it was successful, would undermine our treasured democracy, damage our economy, and would continue with our huge contributions to other people's budgets. It's ridiculous. It shouldn't be here, and I condemn it totally.
Thank you, Councillor Hunt. Councillor Shooter, can I ask you to speak next? But before you do, Councillor Topping, can... Oh, yeah. Councillor Shooter.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Well, I take the opposite view, not necessarily on the motion, but certainly from some of my colleagues. I did not vote for Brexit. I do not support Brexit. And I have to say the whole process worries me incredibly. But you wouldn't expect me to vote for Brexit. After all, I grew up in Europe. I was brought up most of my young life in Portugal. Portugal at that time was a fascist dictatorship. They went through a revolution. It was called the Revolution of Flowers. Only 6 people were killed, so it was a very civilized revolution, but people still died. And they joined Europe. And that country, to a large extent, has been transformed. There's a lot to be said for the European people and the European brotherhood. I have many misgivings about Europe as an institution for the way that their civil service seem to lord it all over their politicians, seem to run the whole thing, is totally alien to us in this country. So I agree with Councillor Hunt that my first ever vote, actually in 1975, was voting for Europe. It is not what I voted for there, and I do agree with that. However, it worries me enormously that by leaving this European club at the time that we're doing so, we leave those smaller countries, and Portugal at the end of the day is our oldest ally, and there are many others out there who've relied on this country to speak up for democracy and to speak up for the European dream. And they feel very let down by us leaving, because they felt we were the only country who could stand up to the German-French alliance, which is clearly going to run Europe in future, because Italy may not be a member, certainly of the Euro, and may even not be a member of Europe in years to come, because there's clearly a lot of dissatisfaction there. So the European dream is a very problematic one. And in fact, my grandfather fought in the First World War. He fought for democracy and he fought for freedom. He didn't necessarily fight for this country because he wasn't British. He was an Australian. And he came over here to fight for the Commonwealth, but to fight for decency. And in fact, he led the Ulstermen into battle. He was the brigade commander of the 36th Ulster Brigade of the Royal Irish Fusiliers. And he led the very first action on the Battle of the Somme. And he was luckily not killed, otherwise I wouldn't be here. But most of his officers were, and most of his men were. And I know he would be horrified that we're now leaving Europe to the mercy of other countries. That being said, I cannot support another referendum. We've had a referendum. I don't personally agree with referendum. I believe we have a parliamentary democracy and our politicians should make the decision. So I didn't agree with the first referendum, but I had to express my vote, and I voted to remain. I do not believe in another referendum, and then another referendum, and another referendum, just because we don't like the result that we got. And also, those of you who are asking for a referendum, I presume you're asking because you think you might win it. Well, a lot of the opinion poll shows you won't. And what do we do then? Frankly, I'd love to have the crystal ball. Please could I borrow it if it works? Because none of us know what's going to happen in Europe. None of us know what's going to happen in these negotiations, and none of us will ever know what it would have been like if we've stayed, or if we decide to stay at some time in the future, what it would have been like the other way around. We just don't know. We are where we are. We should back our politicians, chaotic as it seems at times, but we should back them, hopefully to make the best decisions they can for this country. I believe it will be a very difficult time. I believe we will have five, maybe even 10 years of difficult times, but we will come out of it because as a country we always do. However, I do not support another referendum because I think therein lies the slippery slope of referendum after referendum. Absolutely. We'll end up like Switzerland, where they have referendums as to whether they should hang the washing out, which is ridiculous.
Thank you, Councillor Shooter. Councillor Bowden.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I have a great deal of respect for Councillor Van de Ven, so I listened extremely carefully to her speech in the hope of hearing something new. And actually did hear something new. I'll come to that in a second. But I have to say, the talk of democracy, well, the EU has shown what its idea of democracy is when dealing with other referendums in other parts of Europe. For example, in Ireland, if they don't like the result, they will look for the referendum to take place again and again and again until they get the result that they want. That is not our idea of democracy. And I have to say, we're not going to be leaving Europe. Believe it or not, we're going to get no further away from Europe than we are now geographically. We'll be leaving the European Union, but we're not leaving Europe. It will still be our neighbour, we will still trade with them, one way or another, and we hope they will still be our close allies. And I think that if I hear one more person talk about leaving Europe, I think I will just despair. I did, however, hear one thing from Councillor Van de Ven, which was new to me and puzzled me. And that was the question of how many jurors there are on a Scottish jury. And I don't know. Possibly in her summing up, Councillor Van de Ven would be kind enough to give us the answer, and if not, maybe Councillor Adey would help us.
Thank you, Councillor Bowden. Councillor Topping.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Lost my voice a bit, so I might be a bit croaky. I note that Sir Ivan Rogers, the former permanent representative to the EU, so hardly a buccaneering Brexiteer, in his recent talk here in Cambridge, said that nothing would toxify the Brexit debate further than a second referendum. I've spoken also to businesses in South Cambridgeshire who export globally and for whom Brexit is having no impact whatsoever. And indeed, the reduction in the value of sterling has helped in their competition with their German counterparts. But equally, I know companies in the knowledge economy who fear, particularly if we have a no-deal Brexit. Now, I enjoyed the speech of the Attorney General at the recent Conservative Party conference where he quoted Milton in support of a fearless Brexit. I'm not quite so cheerful as the Attorney General, so I probably would find something from Samson Agonistes to sum up my feelings about particularly a hard Brexit. I don't want us to be eyeless in Gaza at the mill with slaves, but the Prime Minister is being patient with her critics from right and left, and she will deliver a negotiated Brexit, negotiated with our friends in Europe, and that will be ratified by our members of Parliament. And for that reason, I do not support this motion because I believe that time will show it to be irrelevant. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nessinger. Councillor Topping, could you turn your microphone on?
Thank you. I would just like to point out, first of all, I would like to thank Councillor Van de Ven, not just for this motion, which is a really important matter for this council. Brexit will have a huge impact on our work here, on our ability to look after our residents, and we cannot simply ignore what is going on in the national picture. But I'd also like to point out that Cambridgeshire doesn't operate in a vacuum. Brexit will have a really serious and potentially very bad impact on this county, but it will also have a very serious impact on many of our surrounding counties. I spend quite a lot of my time at the moment driving between Oxford and Cambridge. I know that there is a new expressway planned, and that will be very exciting once it's up and running, and a new railway, and these are exciting proposals. And as I go through the 25 roundabouts at Milton Keynes, I think that would be marvellous. But when I get to the other end and I reach Oxford and I drive past that mini factory, I can't help wondering how long that's going to be there if we continue down this route. How long will that factory be operating? And then what will the impact be if they leave as seems extremely likely. What will the impact not only be on that part of Oxford, where there are enormous numbers of people whose jobs depend on those factories, but also on our economy in this area and on all those plans that we have for the future. I live in a house at the moment with 3 teenagers who are utterly horrified at what is being imposed on them. They were none of them old enough to vote when this decision was taken, but it will have absolutely enormous effects on them and their friends as they move from school into the world of work. Yesterday, my son was doing his physics homework with a friend of his who is hoping to move into engineering. She was born in Eastern Europe and moved to this country when she was 4. Her younger sister was born here, and her family have no idea which members of their family will be allowed to stay. She's hoping to go into engineering. She has lived all her life in this country. We really need people like her and her family, and yet they have no certainty about their future at the moment whatsoever, particularly given all the talk there is at the moment of the possibility of no deal. We've heard quite a lot this morning about how we must stick by this decision because that is the democratic view. This was the democracy that was put forward by the people. The one big benefit of democracy, democracy, as said by Winston Churchill, is a really rubbish system. The problem is it's better than all the rest of the systems. And the one huge benefit of democracy is that it allows people to change their minds. If you have a rubbish government, you can get rid of them. And if you make a decision that seems as if it's likely to be really bad for a lot of people, you can change your mind. That is the whole point of democracy. We also have a great deal more information now than we had when we first made this decision. During the referendum campaign, those arguing for leaving the EU promised that doing a deal with Europe would be the easiest thing in the world. It doesn't look like that now. And ironically, that is not because there is not a deal to be done. There are clearly deals that could be done with Europe. The problem is that the government of this country, or more importantly, the Conservative Party, seems utterly incapable of deciding what type of Brexit they want. There have been numerous occasions when the Brexit-supporting wing of the Conservative Party could have put forward their own ideas for a deal, and they have utterly failed to do so. Councillor Shooter says that he thinks this will be a difficult time for this country, but he still believes we have to stick by a vote which there is considerable evidence the public already disagree with. But he is right. There is no guarantee that a second vote would bring a different answer. It might well be that the British public would vote to leave again. And if they did, at least they would know this time what they were voting for, and that decision would then be clear. At the moment, that vote was so close based on dubious information. The legalities of it are already being challenged in many, many places. We should not stick by this simply because we had one vote once. That is not democracy. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Netsinger. Councillor Dupray.
Thank you, Chairman. A few days ago, Andrea Jenkins MP went on Twitter and she said, "It's better to go down fighting and honouring the democratic decision of our British people, full stop, than to be long remembered for waving a white flag and surrendering to EU demands." I don't know whether she thought she was Henry V at the Battle of Agincourt spurring on the troops, or whether she thought she was some middle-ranking officer at the charge of the Light Brigade obeying orders. But as far as I know, nobody who voted in the referendum 2 years ago voted to go down fighting. All we were promised was sunlit uplands. And it's very easy when you have money, security, to give up those things on behalf of other people. There are many MPs going around saying that it's fine to lose your income, your job, your family, in the greater cause, but it's never their income, their job, or their family that they want to give up. The pain will be felt by people, many of whom voted for Brexit because they were deliberately, badly advised and badly led by people who had their own interests in Brexit. Business is already voting with its feet. We haven't even got to Brexit yet, and business is already making its views known and doing what business does, which is taking its money and its investment to the place where it will do best. However, the Conservative Party used to be the party of business. Now it appears, according to Boris Johnson's recent pronouncement, that it's the party of bleep business. I can't use that word in the chamber, Madam Chairman. But it's all right, apparently, because things will be probably okay in about 50 years, according to Jacob Rees-Mogg, or 100 years, according to Lord Digby-Jones. So that's all right, isn't it? It's clear, it is absolutely clear, that there is no majority in Parliament for any individual course of action. It is clear that the positive, hope-filled Brexit promised by the Leave campaign cannot be delivered. As somebody said on, I think it was Mumsnet, she said that she was promised hope, opportunity, travel. She wasn't promised a potato delivered by the army. I agree to many extents with Councillor Shooter that another referendum is not a desirable course of action, but given the stalemate in Parliament, the change of views, the very clear and evident change of view in the country, the divisiveness of the last 2 years, I cannot see another alternative, and I believe that the decision has to go back to a British public that is now in more possession of the facts, or will be, once we know what's on the table, if anything. And once we know what is on the table, then we will be in a much better place to actually make a decision as to whether that is what we want, or whether we are better off as we are, which is not the same as no deal. There are some people who think no deal means everything stays the same. It doesn't. No deal means crashing and burning as an economy. Now, I'm absolutely in awe of Susan van der Ven's work on this in her own community, and the document that she's produced about the impact of all this on people in her division and where she lives. That's a very powerful document, and I hope members will read it and consider what it means for their own areas. I shall certainly be at the march on Saturday, demanding that we have a proper say on this. I know many, many thousands of people will be there as well. I fully support this motion, and I congratulate Susan van der Ven on the work she's done and on bringing this motion here today. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ading.
Thank you, Chair. This is arguably the biggest issue before the UK since the Good Friday Agreement. A compelling enough issue to indeed tear apart the UK. An issue enough to awake this entire county faced with more than uncertain economic times. Many members, I am sure, will be doing their best to represent their divisions on this. Councillors pen many letters. But even for me, this issue caused my first letter to a serving UK Prime Minister. I sought her views on all this uncertainty, her thoughts on how best the government should interpret all the information and the facts which are at their disposal, facts which come in, are analysed, and facts which we as a county, in our own way, receive in other issues, analyse, and decide, oh, that wasn't such a great decision, we better take a slightly different course. No, we better reverse course. So I asked for a view on where they were going. The response I received, Dear Mr. Adey, I'm writing on behalf of the Prime Minister to thank you for your letter of 28th September this year. The Prime Minister appreciates the time you have taken to get in touch and share your views. Thank you once again for writing to the Prime Minister. Correspondence Officer. All right, that was a very thoughtful response to my questions. It struck me that the shades of this lady is not for turning as a sack full of letters, because I'm sure she does get lots of letters, head for the Banksy shredder. But in this occasion, it's no surprise disruption. We're all well aware that by 51.9%, the public overall voted in the advisory referendum to leave. While rather a lot of us choose to ignore the fact that this was an advisory referendum to advise our parliamentarians, not a binding vote. So why not let the people give their views again, their considered views? Let them weigh the facts, the truths, the untruths. On the 51.9% vote, you would wreck our economy, make the vast majority of us poorer, threaten, not protect the NHS. You risk setting Northern Ireland up in flames again and destroying our very union. I welcome this motion, a sensible motion, to allow the people to guide us. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Rogers.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Many issues have been raised over the last 10 or 15 minutes, and I have no intention of repeating them. I'd just like to raise one observation or comment and ask the question, how can any member of this council support or even vote for an organisation which has failed its audit since its inception? If it were a commercial venture, it would be defunct or under administration. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hall.
Thank you. I don't agree with anything Councillor Dupre said, actually, in her speech. When you said people that voted leave were just rich people that can afford to leave, well, people in Wisbech aren't rich people that can afford to leave. It's a very deprived area. They voted massively, perhaps 80%. They aren't idiots. They knew the decision. They knew what they were voting for, and it's an insult to pretend that they didn't. I think this motion is just purely about politics, and that's actually the saddest thing I think about Brexit, whatever side you're on, because people have used it to be political on both sides, and actually that doesn't help the British public. But I think today, actually, it's quite shameful that this has been brought, because just looking at the Twitter feed this morning, on Councillor Netzinger's Twitter feed, there was a retweet about when this came to Cambridge City, and it was done purely to divide the Labour Party. That's what it was about. It wasn't about whether we leave or remain in the EU. It was about, can we score points with the Labour Party and make them feel divided, and that will win us some votes in Cambridge City. And that's actually really sad. I suppose it's a fact of life, but it is sad. Now, I voted Remain. Really tough, actually, being in a defendant seat, and I'm not ashamed to say that, and I can explain why, my reasons. I agonised it for a long time, actually. I came down on my decision because I haven't known anything other than Europe since I've been alive. I've got many European friends, and I worried about their future. And I felt that it was a bit of a risk, and I thought, when it came down to it, and my pen did hover over the box for a long time, I thought, I'm going to err on what I felt was a side of caution. But I have to say, if there was a vote again tomorrow, I would completely change my mind and I would vote leave. And the reason is because everything that I thought might happen hasn't happened. Everything that everyone told me was going to happen hasn't happened. And everyone keeps saying, oh, it's going to happen, it's going to happen, it's going to happen. But it still hasn't happened. And what has actually put my mind the most and made me most firm in my mind is just the way that a number of Remain voters have behaved, actually. And I found it quite shocking and upsetting in the sense that they seek to suggest that anyone that voted leave is some sort of closet racist or some sort of backwater idiot or a number of insults that they like to throw out and pretend that people haven't made their decision. Now, I believe that people that voted leave didn't go there and just make a decision because they're some kind of idiot. They probably sat there like me and agonised over what they should do, and they had probably 101 different reasons as to why they voted leave, and they made that decision. So to pretend that they are idiots that didn't understand why is just plain wrong. We do have a democracy. People made their decision, and leave means leave now. We have to stick with that decision, and I'm glad we're sticking with that decision, and I don't want to have another referendum.
Thank you. Councillor Shellings.
Thank you, Chair. Members, I'm sure we were all heartened by the PM's assurance that austerity has ended. But where will the money come from? As the high-powered city jobs flee to Frankfurt and Paris, we lose their income. We will take, the government's income will fall, and any grants, etc., that we have been used to enjoying from central government will evaporate. We've already lost the RSG. So as an economist, I hesitate to say that because it will invite ridicule, but never mind. One has to make sacrifices in this. There will be further cuts in local authority expenditure if this goes through. The second, much shorter point is, why did Mr. Putin try and support Brexit?
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. There have been some wonderful quotes today from Churchill and other people, but the one that sticks in my memory the most is, the whole point of democracy is the ability to change your mind, from the Liberal Democrat leader. The whole point of democracy is the ability to change your mind. Well, I don't know what everybody else stood up for, but the whole point of democracy is to engage as many people as possible in making a decision. That's what you do. And the referendum is the biggest form of democracy there is. We went out to a whole nation of people for their decision. And you know what? They did make their minds up, and they made it up a certain way. So I think the whole point of that vote wasn't the fact that somebody can come along later on and change the result. It was so that we actually listened to them and did what they appointed people like us to do. So that's, you know, my starting point for why I don't support a second people's vote. And I, like some others, are saddened by this motion being here today, because realistically, it's not about Brexit. The actual call for this at the end is about going to a people's vote. So this isn't a discussion about Brexit, as I see it. This is a discussion about democracy and how we operate democracy. We went out to the country with the biggest referendum this country has ever seen and came to a democratic decision. And because the Liberal Democrats don't like that, they want to go for second people's vote. But I'll go back to that quote from Councillor Netzing again. The reason they want to do that is Liberal Democrats often change their minds. They very rarely can be nailed down to what they actually think on a subject. They will go campaigning down a street and they will tell people on one side of the street it's raining and on the other side of the street it's sunny. That's exactly how they behave. And in this particular referendum, they don't come out, every single one of them wants to remain in Europe. But instead of coming out with a campaign, remain in Europe, they disguise it with behind, let's give the people another chance to say what they mean. And that's quite sad, because the people did decide and have made a decision, we have to implement it. But if you don't like votes, if you don't like taking a vote and sticking by referendum results, why don't we extrapolate that further? For example, did Councillor van der Ven, when she stood for election as a county councillor, put in her leaflet and say, I will concentrate on national issues and take up time in county council meetings on national issues rather than issues that the county council can affect its services by? I suspect she didn't. So therefore, I would suggest that we have another vote in Councillor van der Ven's division. I mean, you'd have to stand down for that, because we can't force it. We can't trigger an Article 50. But if we did, for example, we would then be able to have those, shall I coin a few phrases, those Van der Moners who would say that it wasn't in the leaflet compared to the Van der Mainers saying you got what you voted for, so that'd be fine. So I have actually tested this thought out, and I've done a random survey, a completely randomised survey of a substantial number of random people across the, were in the Conservative group room before we arrived. And that is random because councillors are supposed to represent the people, by and large all of them. So this random set of Conservative councillors, I asked would they agree with that, and 100% said yes. So if we extrapolate that across the country, that actually means there will be no Liberal Democrat councillors ever again, nor would there be a Liberal Democrat MP in Parliament. So they would have no relevance anymore in decision making. Well, not much has changed there then. Back to the Brexit debate. But the other things that you could be said would, you know, what happens about things like exports? So Cambridgeshire has, of course, made one export. Liberal Democrats have exported one of their councillors to Scotland. So that's an amazing feat. That is, of course, he's no longer a Liberal Democrat, he's independent. Of course, that couldn't have been done for financial reasons, because the sterling in England is the sterling, which is pound, which is still absolutely equal to £1 in Scotland, and that hasn't changed since Brexit or the decision. But the thing that people did vote
20
on,
seconds, Councillor.
the people that did vote on, well, they were concerned whether people were taking benefits from England to Europe. And I do think that there's a case that allowances are being taken from Cambridgeshire to Scotland without being properly earned at the moment. I think that's a very good point to end, and I won't be supporting this.
Thank you. Councillor Kindersley. I then have Councillor Whitehead. I have no further speakers. I will therefore ask Councillor Suzevan, you have a right to reply. We will then go to an electronic vote. And we have Councillor Giles, who's just got in there. Councillor Kindersley.
Thank you, Chairman. I hope that Councillor Hoy was listening to the speech that's just been given by the leader of her group. It seemed to me that she was rather despising of political speeches from what she said. I have real issues talking about Brexit, actually, for a lot of different reasons, and it does actually make me slightly emotional. Many of you will know, as we've served together for a long time, that I was born in Scotland, and I grew up in Ireland, and I grew up in the Republic of Ireland when the Republic of Ireland was subject to terrorism. There was effectively a war taking place, and it fills me with despair that even at this very late stage, we cannot, the government cannot, sort out a situation that would stop a potential resurrection of that war. I then moved to this country, and I have to say I'm a very, very proud citizen of the United Kingdom. My family has given generations of service to this country, including in Parliament, and it grieves me very greatly that I am being forced into a position where I have to apply for an Irish passport just so that I know I am safe. And that's ironic, isn't it, Chairman? Because I might be safer going back to a country which may potentially be at war again. I don't have children, I don't have grandchildren, I know many of you on the benches opposite do. And so it makes me worry about the world that those children and grandchildren are going to be living and working and playing in. And it makes me worry because what it says to me is that we are entering an unknown time. And Councillor Bailey urged us to get behind our government, and that's great. Unfortunately, not even the government can get behind the government. And it just fills me with dread as to what may happen. Councillor Hoy made the point that when she was hovering over the ballot paper, she was erring on the side of caution. She felt the decision she was going to make, she would be better off remaining because the danger of leaving was unknown. And the sad thing is, with only months to go, the danger of leaving is still unknown. Councillor Shooter, I think, challenged the issue of a second referendum and what happens if we vote still to leave. And I think that the core difference with a second referendum is that instead of being based around idiotic stories promoted by the Daily Express and the Daily Mail, it is much more likely to be based around truth. And we've heard a lot about democracy and transparency and the will of the people. But all of that is as nothing if it is based on lies. And part of my concern about Brexit is not, as Councillor Hoy pointed out, that people are stupid or that they were uninformed. What I am concerned about is those people made a decent decision, but based on lies. And I don't think anyone in this chamber, realistically, Chairman, can say that 100% of everything that was said during the campaign for Brexit or against Brexit was true. And until we have given the people that we represent the opportunity to make a decision based on truth, we cannot legitimately take forward Brexit, from my perspective. And that is why I support a further vote, because a further vote gives people an opportunity to say, this decision that I am taking is based on truth. And I really despair at the toxicity of this debate, even within this chamber this morning. We are elected to represent the people of Cambridgeshire, and part of our job as Cambridgeshire County Councillors is surely to reflect on the warning from our Chief Finance Officer, to reflect on the fact that we know we have concerns about recruitment and retention in areas of this council's business which are fundamental to people's lives. The job description that Councillor Van der Ven read out...
Councillor Kindersley, you're going over.
Okay.
Are you just finishing?
Yeah, I am. So the job description that Councillor Van der Ven read out reflects a very, very difficult life. Do we really want to make that life harder?
Thank you. Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd just like to
Hang on a minute. Sorry, I'm sorry. That's my fault. I should have called Councillor Giles next. I do apologise. It's all right. We have a problem with... Right. Councillor Giles, if you'd like to say your bit.
Sorry. Thank you, Chairman. Not quite sure of the technicality here, but there you go. Europe, yes, very emotive, word on everybody's lips, apparently. I've put my hands up to voting twice in the European election, one for and one against. So I'm a little bit on the fence. How, you ask? I had a proxy vote. My proxy asked me to vote one way, I voted the other. But like the colleagues over there, I remember the vote for the European Union. whenever it was, 75, and how the cost of land would escalate, butter prices would go through the roof, we'd never able to afford anything else. Bananas, forget bananas, we'd never be able to import those because of European legislation, etc. But it's all worked out, actually, hasn't it? Not so bad. Now, for the last 10, 12 years, I've been associated with Turkey. Probably many of you know, the country, not the bird, I hasten to add. And 10 years ago, Turkey was really keen. Our few acquaintances in Turkey were dead keen to join Europe. They really were. And then the referendum came and they said, God, you know, you've got it wrong. Europe's good. One particular guy over several glasses of Efes and Raki, you know, nearly convinced me that Europe was the thing. That was probably, a few years back. This year, the mood in Turkey has completely changed against Europe. And they are saying, UK, you're doing the right thing. You know, I couldn't understand the change in attitude. And Turkey is a very, very prosperous country, whatever people may think. One of the 5th top countries for self-sufficiency in the world. But they don't want to become part of Europe anymore. And I just couldn't understand, but that is another long debate, and it's all due to immigration. My own feeling about this is, we're asking a vote, another vote. No, you know, let's stick with the decision that the British people made to Brexit, get out of Europe. I wish the government all the very best. It's a job I wouldn't want to be doing. But, you know, let our government deal with it. Then democracy can then come in, then we can change the government after we've decided. So, I won't be supporting this, but there you go. Let's get it going and then change the government afterwards.
Thank you. Councillor Whitehead, if you'd like to press your button.
Thank you. I'd like to say that I too voted in the 1975 vote on Europe. I voted to go into Europe and I voted to remain, as did 75% of the population of the city of Cambridge.
I would like really, as I think most of the points have been made on this side of the House, about a vote would be different because there would be different information, there would be more information for people. And this risible argument that once you've had a vote, it's forever, is clearly nonsense. We had a general election in 2015, and we had another one in 2017, and nobody said, oh, you can't have another general election. You voted in 2015, you're not allowed to change your mind. In fact, people did change their mind quite dramatically in that 2-year period. And therefore, to argue you can't have another vote is simply nonsense. Of course you can, and the reason why you should have another vote is because the situation is now completely different. People now know what Brexit may mean, particularly if we leave without a deal. And therefore, we're not asking people to vote on the same thing. We're asking them to vote on it in a different light, as many of the speakers have said. And there is a lot of evidence, really, about change of mind. If one looks at parts of the country that were most enthusiastic about leave, Cornwall, for example, very enthusiastic, now realise that without migrant workers, their tourist industry, on which they depend for much of their income, will collapse. So they're very worried about it, and they think the rest of us should somehow find the money for that. The same is true of Wales. Again, an enthusiastic group of leavers now worried about all the money they're going to lose from the EU, which had funded many projects in many of the deprived areas in Wales. And they think that the rest of the country's taxpayers should pay more money to bridge that gap. If we look at a group of farmers, again, some very enthusiastic leavers there. Now they realise without migrant workers, they can't get their products out of the ground or to market or harvested. And now they're saying, oh, but we need these migrant workers. And again, as Councillor Nessinger raised the issue about manufacturing. The North East voted again, enthusiastic to leave, and Nissan have made it clear that if there is no deal, there is no trade agreement, they will move their factories, because they're only in Newcastle and around there because they've got access to the single market. If they no longer have that, they will leave, and that will cause huge unemployment. Will the people of the North East vote enthusiastically again for leave? I would bet some money that they may not. So I think there is evidence that because people have got more information, that there may be a change. And if it does go for leave again, okay, it does. But at least, as Sebastian has pointed out, people will be doing it on the basis of evidence, on the basis of real information about what it's going to mean. The second point I'd like to raise is the issue about the government. I found Councillor Count's speech really rather despicable. Brexit is a very, very serious issue. It's very serious for this country. It's very serious for the rest of Europe. No doubt, Councillor Count thought he was being extremely witty, getting up and making a joke about this very, very serious decision. And I really find that appalling. It's not a joke. It's going to be something that affects so many people's lives and for a very long time. And a lot of them, it will be adversely affected. But it does seem to me that's part of the issue. Councillor Bailey said, we should let the government carry on as it's working in the national interest. I doubt that. I find it very hard anymore to believe that Brexit is being worked on in the national interest. It seems to me Brexit has become a plaything of the Conservative Party, a topic on which they can fight for power, they can fight each other, and they can then, I don't know that they're taking it seriously. I really don't get that. And I, like many people, despair of there ever actually being an agreement and that we will leave without a deal and that will be catastrophic. And that's why I support, and indeed the Labour Party supports, that if there is a deal on the table, it should be voted on by the people. And therefore, we strongly support this motion. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I personally think everybody's taken this very seriously. Councillor Van der Ven, you have the right to reply, and then we will be going to the electronic vote.
Thank you very much. As for being the worst motion that this council might have ever heard, I would say that this is the most important issue that has come to this country as long as I've lived here, which is more than 30 years. Thank you, Councillor Maguire, for giving me the number 15 on a piece of paper. although I did have my colleague look it up. It is 15 members of the jury. And the ingredients of an Ulster fry, I will tell you after the meeting. Like Councillor Shooter and Councillor Kindersley, for me this is an emotional subject, and maybe I should declare that as an interest. I wasn't born or raised here either. I was born in Lebanon, where last month, Last month I visited Lebanon, and suffice it to say, many locations within a small area where friends and family have been blown up. And to try and explain Brexit to them, which is to them the unraveling of a community of nations, is impossible. My husband is Dutch. His family was, like many others, destroyed by the German occupation. So I chose to become a citizen after having lived here for 15 years because I was so impressed with this country's partaking in a community of nations that is working for peace. I asked my father-in-law, who gave me this necklace, if he loved the EU, because I got quite excited about it, coming from where I had come from. And he said, no, I don't love the EU. It's not perfect, but it's necessary. So, turning to the comments that you've all kindly offered today, the referendum did not spell out the terms of leaving, and I think that's the problem we've got today. And there are many, many contradictions. I agree with Councillor Bailey, let's unite behind public interest, but public hasn't had a chance to vote on the terms of Brexit. Councillor Bailey, as chair of Adult Social Care Committee, I'm surprised that you're not more concerned about the impact on this council, whose main responsibility is social care. Councillor Tierney, the Fenland deep dive visit that I was lucky enough to attend with my health committee colleagues showed a very mixed, absolutely concerning and different picture of Brexit in Finland, and I appreciated being there that day, but as I say, this was a mixed picture which we could talk about outside. I'd be very interested to talk with you. Councillor Hunt, you mentioned damage to our economy if we don't leave the EU. Anyway, if I didn't get that right, perhaps you could explain to me afterward, but you haven't provided any evidence of that. Councillor Bowden, you say we will still be trading with the EU. Under what terms? Under margins that will protect business in Cambridgeshire? I would say that's up for grabs. Councillor Topping, glad you have met businesses in our area that have not been impacted by Brexit, that will not be impacted or have not been impacted by Brexit, but certainly others will. And I did ask my MP from another party to go around with me in my community to talk to local business, and we didn't get a very rosy picture. I do not wish for a referendum. I feel it's the only option left to us now. Government is paralyzed. We've been waiting for it to lead for 2.5 years, and it hasn't. And again, I return to the fundamental problem of lack of terms of Brexit. And then, I've got my copy of our corporate priorities here, but we might want to look at those again and ask whether Brexit is supporting our corporate priorities. Why was there no briefing for today's motion? I did ask that question because I was curious, and the answer was we wouldn't know where to start or finish. Finally, Councillor Count, I was hopeful when you mentioned the ability to change your mind, because we should be flexible, certainly when we have new information. And I agree with you that decision-making should involve as many people as possible, which is what's behind my motion. But I was disappointed that you suggested that national issues are not relevant. And you, as the leader of this council, fighting for fair funding for Cambridge, you must be worried about negative RSG, etc. As for another election, I may not be an Indigenous person and I may have a foreign name, but I'm confident to stand again. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Van de Ven. We will now move to an electronic vote. Mrs. Rowe, can you take us through the voting, please? We are
Would members please press the blue button to indicate they are present? Members in favour of the motion, please press the green button marked plus. Members against the motion, please press the red button marked minus. Members wishing to abstain, please press the yellow button marked with the cross.
You voted. That's good.
Chairman, unfortunately, Councillor Jones's unit isn't working. Can I therefore ask Councillor Jones how she will be voting? Okay. I am now closing the vote. Chairman, the result of the vote is 23 votes in favour, 32 against, no abstentions. The motion is therefore lost.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That concludes discussion of the first motion. We now move to the second motion submitted by Councillor Dupre. Can I ask Councillor Dupre to move and speak to her motion as set out on the page 3 of the Council agenda? I understand there is an alteration and that Councillor Hudson is seconding it. The alterations have gone round. Councillor Dupre.
Right, do you want me to speak now or just to formally move the motion?
And Councillor Hudson is seconding it and reserving his right to speak. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. I don't have a lot of time to watch a lot of television these days, and when I do, it's usually about several years after everybody else has seen what I was watching. But I did manage about 6 months ago to catch up with the first series of The Queen on Netflix. I don't have Netflix, I haven't got time for all that, but I bought the box set in Tesco. I recommend it. And I thought one of the best episodes of the first series of The Queen was the one that dealt with the infamous London smogs. And the dreadful events there in the early 1950s, I think, and the fatalities that resulted from those dreadful, dreadful, can't see your hand in front of your face smogs that the capital city suffered. We don't have those now, and so there is a tendency among some people to say, well, it's all right then, but it's not. Just because you can see your hand in front of your face doesn't mean that our air is clean or safe, and in many places it is not. We're talking about particulates, particularly the small particulates, PM2.5, which can get deep into the lungs. We're talking about nitrogen dioxide, which used to be measured as a proxy for particulates because it was cheap to measure compared to particulates which aren't, but are now seen as threats in their own right. This stuff kills. 5% of Cambridgeshire's population mortality is attributed to air pollution. The figures from 2010, which were the basis for some work following that year, showed that there were 257 deaths in Cambridgeshire that year, which were attributable to air pollution. The Health Committee, to its credit, has begun to do some work on this. And that's very welcome indeed, because the picture is very confused. There are a lot of agencies with a finger in this particular pie, and they don't always work together. We held a conference, well, it wasn't called a conference, but it was some sort of a get-together in June this year, during the week of Clean Air Day 2018. Which was something that my colleague Councillor Jenkins and I particularly asked to happen, and it was very good to see that it did. And since then, we've had a report to the Health Committee last month with some suggestions for further action. We've seen proposals there, and in fact things already taking place in the area of training, where those with skills and expertise in air quality and the health aspects of pollution are now giving training to people who deal with highways, and there's the potential to expand that further to people in planning departments and so on, to make them more aware of the impact of their decisions on air quality, air pollution and public health. We've seen moves to make more data on air quality publicly available online through the Cambridgeshire Insight. We've seen moves to look at doing more and supporting more citizen science with more data collection. It's very expensive and very cumbersome to collect this information, and anything that we can do to distribute that among the population at large has to be very welcome. The report that went to last month's meeting talks about creating an air quality network of those who are interested. That was an idea that came out of the conference as well, and I very much hope to see that happen. And even the prospect possibly of hosting an NHS Sustainability Fellow to work more closely with the NHS from our perspective on all of this. So all of that is beginning to emerge as a very welcome body of work to start to address the very, very important, the life and death issue of air quality. As I've just said, our contribution, if you will, to the 2018 Clean Air Day was to hold an internally focused conference, pulling together the various bodies, the various strands. I think where we were, that was a good decision and that was the right thing to do. Gosh, I sound like David Cameron there. He was saying things were the right thing to do, wasn't he? I'm very much hopeful that through this motion, 2019's Clean Air Day and our support for that will be more outward focused, that having gathered together people, having started work to develop what we're doing, share information, share expertise and good practice, that we can start being more outward looking and working with and supporting our communities in what they choose to do. There has been an amendment put by Councillor Hudson, which I'm very happy to support, and I would like, therefore, to include that along with my speech and moving of this motion. I've been assured that that isn't an attempt to water down the motion, but just to give us the options there, and it's not a box-ticking exercise. It is actually a positive move forward. I shall be holding Councillor Hudson and the Health Committee to that, and I commend the motion to you.
Thank you, Councillor Dupre. I actually have no further speakers, or no speakers indicating I have... Sorry. Okay, sorry, Councillor.
Sorry, I couldn't obviously press a button.
Oh.
I'm happy to...
Hang on a minute. I think they're going to bring you the microphone. Do you need... Yeah, we'll bring you the microphone. I don't know if you need it or not. It's up to you.
So it won't go out on YouTube if you don't speak. Thank you very much. Thank you. I am happy to support this motion. It's now estimated there are 50 or more deaths every year in Cambridge alone related to air quality. And how many more COPD, bronchiectasis, chest, lung, all sorts of conditions are actually exacerbated by poor air quality across the whole county, we do not know. This motion essentially states the work that the Health Committee has been trying to do. And all of us across parties have been working together because all of us see public health as an absolutely crucial issue. But I would say that there is work to do not just across the Health Committee, but across the whole council. And I don't quite see that in this motion, but it is really important. If you are commissioning in another committee, thinking about services to support domiciliary health, then think about air quality in terms of how you ask them to organise the transport. If you are thinking about where you site a school, think about air quality and children breathing in fumes if you site it beside a busy road. If you are planning road repairs or road developments, think about the impact of air quality on people living near. So this is not something, the Health Committee can lead on this, but actually it needs fast followers, and it needs people to take this issue seriously right across the council, as well as across districts and the city, and obviously nationally. So please do your part. Every councillor can make a contribution in this area.
Thank you. Councillor Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair. I find this motion rather limp. And in fact, when it's been amended, it becomes limper. Linda talked about the terrible things that happened with pollution. Lorna, to her credit, did too. The health and social care cost of air pollution in England could reach 5.3 billion by 2035. Last year, there were 42.88 million. So that, I think, is increasing 100-fold. Air pollution is an existential threat to the health of this nation. We have got to address it. And the reason I say this is pretty limp is that all we're going to do is to, after the amendment, we're going to support next year's Clean Air Day. Well, that's the sort of baseline. I would have expected 100 times more. Supporting Clean Air Day will be a press release, a bouncy castle, a few people walking around with badges on. No, we actually need hard programs which make it clear to the world out there that we know what a killer pollution is, and actions to deliberately reduce it. And we cannot anymore pay lip service to the fact that pollution from roads close to neighbourhoods and schools damage the health and potentially kill people. Remember Noel's motion at the last council, which I said I would support even though it was not a great motion, talking about the health of school children with roads outside them. Let us not forget the case of Ella Kisser-Deborah, who, in the post-mortem on her death, put it down to the fact that she lived close to a busy road. I'll support this, but it's a limp motion, and we should be doing 100 times more.
Thank you, Councillor Jenkins. Councillor Hudson.
I'd very much like to thank... Oh, you're very kind, thank you. I'd very much like to thank Councillor Dupre in bringing this motion, because it just shows the very good work the Health Committee is doing and continues and will continue to do on this very, very, very important subject. It may be a bit limp, Councillor Jenkins, but the work is there and the work is going on. Parts of Cambridgeshire do experience high levels of air pollution, particularly around Cambridge City and if you live in my area next to the A14. And that can impact on the health of all our residents, and further residents are becoming more concerned about the air quality within their areas. And the air quality, let's not forget, is one of the most important priorities of this authority's Health Committee. The Health Committee recognises that it cannot improve air quality on its own, and improvements can only be made through joint working across this authority, closer working with our partners in the districts and cities, and greater engagement with our residents. This is why our Health Committee asked officers to undertake a shared programme of work over the last 9 months and agreed the actions outlined in the briefing note which we all received the other day. This is work ongoing and work which will continue to carry on and improve upon. Clean Air Day 2019 provides good focus for the joint programmes of work on improving air quality, which we are doing. This is a high-profile national event which can be built on in order to increase the awareness and to help residents better understand the impact of air quality and the steps they can improve on if they chose to do so for their local communities. I very, very much support this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to make a point following up from what Councillor Jones has said. In fact, the Children and Young People's Committee recently considered an application from a school who were asked by the Regional Schools Commissioner to open a free school in the Huntingdon area. And the site they proposed was on an industrial estate next door to the A14. I'm very pleased to say that the Children and Young People's Committee refused to endorse this, and the chair very bravely went off to tell the people who wanted to put the school there that we weren't going to support them. So we are taking into account air quality on that committee, and it will be interesting to see what the Department of Education think about our refusal to allow a school in that area. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I have no further speakers. Councillor Dupre, you have the right to reply. I've heard nobody against this motion, so we will therefore vote by show of hands. Councillor Dupre, if you would like to reply.
Thank you very much, Chair. Very briefly, I'd like to start by thanking Councillor Jenkins for his support, as always. Limp it may be, but I did make reference to the work that is already ongoing, and I hope that will bear some fruit. In fact, Councillor Jenkins, as a member of the Health Committee, is in a better position than I am to hold Councillor Hudson to account in delivering that. And I'm sure he will, and I'm sure Councillor Hudson will as well. I agree absolutely with Councillor Jones that we need a whole council approach, because this does affect everything we do, hence the importance of training for planners and highways people and everything else. Councillor Whitehead's example about school location was an excellent exemplification of that. So really what I want to say in conclusion is that limp this may be, but it does build on some work that's already going on, and it offers an opportunity in our communities to use Clean Air Day 2019 to bring further focus to this issue and take practical action in our area. So my challenge really to everybody in this chamber is, what will you do for Clean Air Day 2019?
Thank you, Councillor Dupre. Can I ask for those in favour, by show of hands, for the motion to pass? Thank you, that is unanimous, but I will check. Anybody against? Any abstentions? Thank you. That concludes discussion on the second motion. We now move to the third motion submitted by Councillor Sanderson. Can I please ask Councillor Sanderson to move and speak to his motion as set out on page 4 of the council agenda? I also understand there is an alteration by Councillor Bates that you have accepted, and that Councillor Bates is seconding and reserves it. Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'd like to thank, I'd like to thank Councillor Bates for his amendment, and also Councillor Downs for his help in drafting this motion. Chairman, I think we all welcome the work to provide a new route between Ellington and Fen Ditton, take the burden off the infamous A14, which many of us had to negotiate this morning. We look forward to it being completed in December 2020. But this motion is actually about the legacy that the council will inherit when the A14 viaduct by Huntingdon train station is removed and the current A14 becomes a detrunked route under the county council's management. There will be more miles of local highway for the county council to manage when Highways England's proposed link road from the junction with Hinchinbrook Park Road and Brampton Road to the old A14 by police headquarters, to be known as the Views Common Link, is installed. All of this and the new infrastructure that Highways England want to install on the existing local roads, which would include new sets of traffic lights and crossings, will also add to those costs. There's still some doubt about whether these proposals, once the viaduct is removed, will improve or exacerbate the existing traffic congestion in the area. Hinchinbrook Park is next to the railway station, as I've mentioned. It obviously has Hinchinbrook Hospital, a secondary and a primary school, as well as over 600 houses and a well-established country park and police headquarters, all using just one point of entry and exit at the moment. As Highway England's proposals stand, people will still have to use Hinchinbrook Park Road as they do now to get off the estate, and the costs of installing new traffic lights and crossings could actually be put into upgrading the existing crossing point on Brampton Road by Scholars Avenue. From the discussions that both myself and other members have had with our officers, the final decision on the A14 legacy, including the highway management and costs, to be left to this council, actually still rests with the Secretary of State for Transport through Highways England. In the development consent order, the examination stage, this council made representations regarding approval of the design of the local road element of this scheme. And we were advised by HE's legal representative, the Secretary of State at that time was not willing to give approval authority to anybody else other than himself through Highways England. We have been assured that they will consult with us over the design and that case law places an obligation on them to reasonably adopt our comments. We actually had to propose a legal agreement to protect the Council's interests in the future road network and detrunked sections, and Highways England have actually agreed that they will consult with us and they will have due regard to our comments. Despite what some people have said in the press, there's actually no design development in place and no final agreement from our officers or members on the legacy for the locally managed routes. We're going to be heavily dependent on receiving a bigger local transport plan settlement from the Department of Transport in 2020-21 to pay for all this. Although I find it troubling that Highways England have this degree of authority, if their traffic forecasts turn out to be wrong and the problems are worse, they're actually obliged to put them right. I'd actually rather that Highways England got this right the first time, so I'm proposing this motion because I think it's time now for our Chief Executive to ensure that this Council has its say by writing to Highways England along the lines that I've suggested. There's in fact a steering group to deal with these issues, so I think this needs to be re-established and local members and officers need to meet soon to discuss this further. I also think our Economy and Environment Committee, chaired by Councillor Bates, should consider the final proposals and have influence in that final decision. This is now coming to a head, as I said, because a lot of our officers and local stakeholders and local residents have expressed concerns about some of the designs from Highways England. This will have a big impact not only on Huntingdon but on neighbouring villages like Brampton and Buckton if we don't get this right the first time. It'll also have a big impact on our budget and all the other things that we want to do throughout the county if we're to take on a lot more highway without a proper financial settlement from central government. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Sanderson. Councillor Bates, you reserve your right to speak as well, yeah? Thank you. Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Chair. We at Labor are very pleased to support this motion, and I rise because I want to do so from two perspectives. One is that we're very pleased again to be able to reaffirm our position that albeit we are county councillors within the City of Cambridge, we certainly support our county councillors who exist outside Cambridge and the residents outside Cambridge. Therefore, we emphasise that we support this motion absolutely. And I also am very pleased that we are able to say, grant plaudits to the county council officers in relation to the problems that the building on the A14 has taken in respect of the city, Cambridge City. And we know, therefore, that the officers will be absolutely cooperative and working their hardest to support the councillors outside in Huntingdonshire. I would like to, in that regard, also give plaudits to our MP for Cambridge, Daniel Zeichner, who has worked really hard to ensure that when the HGV vehicles came down Histon Road, down Huntingdon Road, down Victoria Road at all hours of the day and night, that he worked really hard by a speech at Westminster, by cooperating and talking with the county officers and also with Highways England to ensure that action was taken in that regard. And to the county officers, most specifically, Sonia Hanson, who worked really hard to ensure that proper action was taken with Highways England to alleviate the problems that were coming into Cambridge, and therefore I'm sure that she will take the same action in relation to what is happening outside when the project is completed. And I pay tribute to Graham Armstrong and Evan Lachlan, who are no longer with the county, but they were very effective. And then to Andy Barham in particular, one of the problems that has arisen is that those lids that Anglia Water puts over their operations under the road have caused huge problems because HG vehicles come down and create noise, and he's been really effective, Andy Barham, in terms of taking action in this regard. And I would finally pay tribute to my colleague, Councillor Richards, because she and I have had numerous concerns raised with us from residents. I said finally, but I must, as my final, say thank you to Lillian Rundbland, who is here from Histon Road Area Residents Association, because she ensured that these residents had their voice heard. And as I've said, the voice was heard loud and strong within the County Council. The officers worked effectively to ensure that Highways England was alerted, and our MP worked effectively in that regard too. So I say this will happen for those people out in Huntingdon who will be suffering problems as a consequence, that in terms of the consequences my colleague here, Councillor Sanderson, has raised. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Down.
Thank you, Chairman. As Tom Sanderson has said, he and I have been working together on this. The stretch of road we are most concerned about is actually in his division, but many of the people who use the road come from the adjacent division, which is Brampton and Buckton, which I represent. Now, what we are not asking you to do is to comment on the detail of the layout. That is inappropriate in a gathering of this nature. We're not asking for that. But what we are asking you for you to support, and I hope wholeheartedly, is the principle that when a national organisation carries out a major piece of work with a knock-on effect on the local network, that the last word should rest with the local people. Now, what appears to be proposed at the moment is going to exacerbate what is already a difficult situation. Any of you who have been to meetings in that area, and some of us were in the country park last Friday afternoon, Josh, and we came out and we immediately hit a long traffic jam. No, it's already not satisfactory, and we fear that the proposals that appear to be being made by Highways England will exacerbate a situation which is already undesirable. Now, congestion is bad news. It's bad news because it's an inconvenience, of course. It means people miss appointments, miss trains occasionally. But to pick up the theme of the preceding motion, congestion is bad for pollution, because vehicles just idling along produce more pollution than vehicles travelling at a reasonable speed. And the area we are concerned about is right next to a school, and I declare an interest. It was a school I was head of for 14 years. So there are nearly 1,850 pupils right next to this road. So I believe that it's important that we, as local councillors, with the support of the relevant committee, should make our views known, and we urge Highways England to be more sympathetic and constructive, because it is we who will pick up the criticisms and the complaints and the costs going forward. So I hope that we can agree on this. It is not a political point-scoring exercise. It is entirely for the good of the residents of our areas, and I hope that we will support this as a matter of principle. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chairman. My division, Golminster and Huntingdon South, is just adjacent to this area, and a lot of the school children from Golminster either walk or cycle across the bridge and then down this road to Hinchinbrook School. A lot of other people work in Hinchinbrook Hospital. The new A14 will do wonders, hopefully, for Golminster, in that it will reduce the traffic flows and the congestion and lead to far better air quality. But I do remain concerned about the road safety for these children cycling and walking to school. So far, the Highways England have been extremely reluctant to properly engage with me and the Golminster Town Council. They've got their own ideas about how they're going to try and deal with the road layouts, and won't really talk to us about alternatives or ways of improving safety. So if we all agree today that they should do much more engagement with us and allow proper consultation and input, then I think that that will improve road safety for children, as well as reduce congestion and improve air quality. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I call Councillor Bates, there's no further speakers, so then I will go back to Councillor Sanderson, who has the right to reply. I've had nobody against this so far, so we will go vote by show of hands. Councillor Bates.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This is a complex area, and I think we all recognise that. For those that looked at the briefing and the map, you'll see how complex the area is around the Huntingdon area. Totally accept what Councillor Wilson has said. Government Chester High Street will be a great benefit in all areas of congestion and air pollution. That doesn't actually solve necessarily Huntingdon's area, okay? And essentially what we're being asked today is actually for the Chief Executive to write to Highways England, and let's see what comes out of that letter and what comes back to us, and let's see how we can actually work together. We have had, as I think everybody accepts, a good working relationship with Highways England in this project, but there is still more work to do around this particular area. So I fully support the recommendation, Madam Chairman, and hope that it will go forward with unanimous support from this chamber, and then we will, I'm sure, we will hear more about it, I suspect, in front of the E&E committee in due course, when we have met, when we have discussed, and when we have actually seen some suggestions coming from all sides. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bates. Councillor Sanderson, you have the right of reply.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to thank colleagues for their contributions and happy to go to the vote.
Thank you very much. I will now go to a vote by show of hands. Those in favour of the motion? That is unanimous. Anybody against? Anybody abstentions? No. That concludes discussion of the third motion. We now move to the fourth motion submitted by Councillor Richards. Can I ask Councillor Richards to move and speak to her motion as set out on page 4 and 5 of the Council agenda? And who is your seconder, please? Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Richards, if you'd like to speak to your motion.
Yes, certainly. If I sit down, it's because I've hurt my foot, so I'll stand as long as I can. Okay. So yesterday, Monday, October the 15th, Conservative-led Norfolk County Council passed the recommendation to deliver a full council tax for all Norfolk care leavers living in or outside of Norfolk. According to the Children's Society, more than a third of councils have done so or are in the process of doing so, including non-unitary authorities such as Lancashire, Hertford and Sussex. In fact, the whole of Scotland legislated to do so on October the 11th. Wales has a similar approach. Yet, Cambridgeshire CYP Committee met on September the 11th, 2018 and voted against developing a scheme exempting care leavers from paying council tax, following the recommendation of the paper, consideration of exemption from council tax for care leavers. Reasons given in the paper included that because Cambridgeshire County Council is a two-tier authority, such a scheme would be complicated. And the paper raises the question, I quote, even if it was possible to develop such a scheme. Well, the good news is that it is possible. Other authorities are, in fact, about 2/3 of the UK are committing to such schemes, and some have them. In a two-tier authority like Cambridgeshire, it is the district councils who are the billing authority and issue council tax bills to care leavers. Any direct change to care leavers' council tax bills would have to be implemented by the district councils. Some county councils are planning to forego the county share of care leavers' council tax and are working with the district groups and the Police and Crime Commissioner so they pick up the tab for their share, creating a uniform scheme across the county. Some counties are paying the whole amount, such as Lancashire. It is perfectly possible for Cambridgeshire to do something similar. Cambridge City already offers care leavers council tax support by placing them in their vulnerable group and offering a 100% discount. A further reason given in the paper, and I quote, is that approaches that provide relief to a specific group of care leavers immediately results in the risk of potential challenge from other care leavers who could legitimately argue that they are being discriminated against, in this case on the basis of where they happen to be living, i.e. out of county. We can only hope that if a young person leaving care were to be discriminated against in such a way, they would complain. They should. Other counties, such as Norfolk, have found solutions For example, putting a grant scheme in place to pay the council to their care leavers who live outside of the county. There's not only compelling evidence that we can, but there's compelling evidence that we should do so. Provisions in the Children and Social Work Act 2017 sets out in law what it means for a local authority to be a good corporate parent. This includes fostering successful transition into adult life and the ability to be independent, including being financially so. Ofsted, the Children's Social Care Inspectorate, expect councils to evidence this support. Financial support is needed to bridge this transition into adulthood for care leavers, not the notion, somewhat reminiscent of Dickensian satire, I believe, and I quote from the report, that our care leavers should immediately face the harsh reality that paying bills is part of taking responsibility for oneself. Paying care leavers council tax is a way of targeting some of that support. Evidence shows that care leavers are a particularly vulnerable group in this context. When they move into independent accommodation, it can lead to depression and anxiety and even abandonment of their homes. The Children's Society 2015 Wolf at the Door report evidence in their campaign, which has cross-party support, that care leavers are particularly vulnerable in paying council tax. Wouldn't we want to do all we can to protect the children on our care and in our families from these experiences until they're able to care for themselves? The estimated figure for Cambridgeshire paying the full council tax for care leavers is 400,000. It would be possible to have a phased approach covering 18 to 20-year-olds, costing initially 110,000. 110,000 out of a budget of millions? This sum could be decreased by the districts and police crime commissioners paying their part, which is the model, as is the model elsewhere. And there is the investor-save approach. Care leavers, as we know, are vulnerable and overrepresented in the statistics for young people who are experiencing drug abuse and mental health issues and financial difficulties.
Time, Councillor Richards. You've got much more left?
I've not got much more. I've not got much more.
Fine.
Can I just say one more thing? Okay. Okay. One more thing? Yeah. Do we really want to discriminate against our care leavers in the face of a national trajectory? I'm all for lobbying for exemption for care leavers.
Time, Councillor Richards.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Bywater.
Thank you very much, Chair. I have major concerns over this motion, as I believe we really do need to have a national formula, rather than just an ad hoc approach that we have before us. I think this motion is trying to undermine the decision made by CYP councillors, and I see no reason to not work with our district partners, but we also need to understand on what basis, and this motion fails to recognise any of this. As chairman of the CYP, I would also like to apologise to everyone on the CYP committee who took a large amount of their time to discuss these complex issues and to come to a unanimous decision back in September. I'm of the opinion that Councillor Richards has totally disregarded the democratic process for the committee system that took place. Let's not forget it was her group that voted to fully support the committee system back in 2013. This motion is just simplifying a very, very complicated matter. Nowhere does this motion highlight what will happen to our outer county children. What will happen to children from other authorities in our own county? What about SEN young people leaving home right now? What about young people with disabilities leaving home right now? What about young people on the edge of care who have even less support than our looked after children? Where can we draw the line on which young people we support without being seen as being discriminatory? I believe this motion, if voted for, would be exposing this authority to a very real risk of legal action for discrimination if we continue down this route without a national agreement being put in place as agreed by the CYP. I've personally spoken to other local authority lead members in children's services at the regional network, and there is a real ad hoc approach around councils which worries me even more. When I challenged discrimination against some of these key leaders, all I was met with was shrugging shoulders, albeit some leaders echoed my concerns who hadn't adopted any approach preferring a national agreement. In my opinion, many councils are running high risk of discrimination against young people for doing this. As I've said, the CYP committee resolved unanimously to support all young people within the recommendations, which is well documented,
This support also included a Labour group leader, who I have to say engaged me fantastically in the process at CYP, as did other League members from the CYP. Councillor Richard, this issue is surmountable, but only if we get national policy in place, as quite frankly I believe anything less could be tested in a court going forward and be seen or perceived to be discriminatory against any one individual young person. Council tax relief is already available to single young people, and Cambridgeshire County Council are doing lots to support care leavers. Only a couple of weeks ago, I opened a new house in Cambridge to support 2 young care leavers, backed by an area project grant of £1.3 million from the DFE over the next 2.5 years, supported by our partners, Break Charity and Norfolk County Council. We also created an action from the CYP committee to include an item on the support available to care leavers, including support provided to teach budget management and life skills, and this is going back to the Corporate Parenting Subcommittee, which will report back in due course. Finally, as you've quite rightly outlined, it's estimated that the cost is going to be in the region of £400,000. Well, I don't know where you're getting this money from, but when we have so many crucial demands on our already diminishing pressured funds. The recommendations proposed to this council are vague, lack detail and proposed outcomes, and will prevent litigation risks. And because of all this, I can't support this motion.
Thank you. Councillor Every.
Sorry. Thank you, Madam Chair. I chair the Corporate Parenting Subcommittee, which has delegated authority to exercise all the Council's functions relating to the delivery by or on behalf of the County Council of corporate parenting functions, with the exception of policy decisions, which remain with the Children and Young People's Committee. We are one of the few such committees that has co-opted young people working with us who have had or have recent experience of being looked after or receiving services as a care leaver from the County Council. All 7 members of the subcommittee are totally committed to the well-being of our care leavers, including ensuring that these services provide the best outcome, whether delivered within the county or outside the county, i.e. to the 50% of our care leavers who live, are educated, trained or work outside the area. We have a duty of care to all our 700 young people for whom we are corporate parents. We are there through our corporate parenting strategy to ensure that they fulfil their educational potential, successfully gain employment, have good health and well-being, are equipped to be parents, and if placed outside the county, are not disadvantaged. We will monitor and challenge to make sure this happens. We also work with our professional staff to seek out and investigate initiatives that will support this. An exemption from council tax for those leaving care was one of them. On the face of it, without real interrogation of what it might mean, no national support scheme in place, we referred our idea to the Children and Young People's Committee in order that a rigorous investigation could be undertaken into the benefits, negatives and costs of such a system, and indeed to learn exactly what we deliver to our young people now. We also need to understand in full the other services and benefits that are in place to support our young people as they leave care, which is our local offer in line with the Department for Education's Keep on Caring document of July 2016. The ambitions we have for all our care leavers, whether they live in Cambridgeshire, Lincolnshire or anywhere else, is that they are better prepared and supported to live independently. The request for this investigation resulted in members of the CYP receiving a paper on the 11th of September. My colleague was not in attendance to hear the debate. However, other members of the subcommittee were, alongside other cross-party members of that committee. It was a unanimous decision not to adopt a scheme that exempts care leavers from paying council tax, in the absence of any national arrangements or secure arrangements with other councils in this area, or approve a system that would possibly disadvantage 50% of our own young people. It is a hugely complicated area, and with no national cohesion, we have a 2-tier system, and we require the buy-in from other councils. Very few councils actually pursue this in a cohesive way, so there would be very few examples of good practice which could mirror our own situation. And it would seem that many of these support the care leavers in their immediate area and don't support the ones outside. That would be 50% of our care leavers disadvantaged against those living locally. We can't let that happen. These are all our children. What we have done is to increase our financial commitment by employing a greater number of personal advisors who will work with our care leavers alongside a broad range of support, including budgeting and financial management and the provision of financial support where a young person is in clear difficulty. We accept our responsibilities to support care leavers in all areas of their lives as they make the transition from young adulthood into independence. This subcommittee will work tirelessly to ensure this transition is as positive as it can possibly be, and we have many ideas that we want to work on with our professional colleagues. I have to say, I am disappointed that it would seem that a member of that subcommittee wanted to pursue a path which could be divisive without thoroughly investigating what is currently being delivered and what future plans we have in order to support these care leavers. If I were cynical, I might suggest that my colleague was using this for political point scoring. However, I would prefer to give the benefit of the doubt, as I can't believe anyone would use this when responsible for such vulnerable young people as those who have struggled and will continue to struggle to get their lives together against all odds. More importantly, let's work together to actively pursue the third recommendation on the CYP paper, i.e. to support the Director of Children's Services writing to central government to request the development of a properly funded national scheme of council tax relief that can help all young people living independently. And as we are all corporate parents of our young people, I urge you to support this as much as you can. I will not be supporting this motion.
Councillor Tierney.
Having looked at this motion, I do believe that it comes from the best of places. I don't believe that it is cynical virtue signalling, and so I'd like to address it in that spirit. My problem with it is this. Every meeting I attend of this council, we seem to be talking about our budgetary challenges, and we seem to be talking about how we have to find more savings and how difficult the current climate is. And then a motion like this comes along that identifies a vulnerable group and says, let's spend a load of money. And I can identify lots more vulnerable groups upon whom we could give assistance and spend more money if we had an unlimited pot of money. We don't. And I would like to see motions like this come forward with a comprehensive explanation of where the money comes from. Not a wishy-washy one, not a dreamy one, a comprehensive explanation of where the money comes from, and then I think we'd be willing to consider it. But until then, it's wishful thinking in a dream world that we don't live in.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wish to speak on this motion not for political reasons, but because the issues touch very much upon my own experience and that of my family. We often hear from people about life being a lottery, where you happen to live, what country you're in, what work you've got, where you go to school, what your health's like, what your council's like. I believe that the big golden ticket in life is family. Being born into a family that supports you, and maybe something that many of us may take for granted. The family gives emotional well-being and support, and that starts when children are born, perhaps a little bit before it goes on past 16, past 18. But beyond that, many young people, or most you might say, are still living at home as young adults. The average age of leaving home for general population is 24. That's a lot older than the age of those leaving care, even if there is post-leaving support from families. And that means emotional support, but also support for education and training, relationships, getting into employment. It's not the same for children in care who don't do as well in those areas. They have poorer educational outcomes, and there could be many reasons for that. It might be because they're moving around a lot during their school careers, or it could actually be because they have a bad early start and they're perhaps traumatised, and the reasons for which they go into care in the first place make it more difficult for them to do well in education. They're less likely to be in employment as well, as a corollary of those poorer educational outcomes.
31% nationally of 18-year-old care leavers are not in education, employment or training. So that's 31% compared to 12% of the general population, and it's rising. I think that's actually an indictment of our care system nationally, that there is such a huge gap between those who are in families and those who are in care. And that, I was heartened to hear Councillor Every talking about what we're doing about that and about our responsibilities as a council to set young people in care up for the future. But we clearly have much to do, and we are not at the point yet where those people have equal opportunities and they're much more likely to be financially disadvantaged and to have less support. So I believe, as a corporate parent, this motion gives us the opportunity to give those young people who have had such bad cards dealt to them early in life, to give them a break. And I'd like to say thank you very much for bringing this motion, and I shall be supporting it. Thank you. Before I go to Councillor Netzinger, can I ask Councillor Crawford, do you wish to speak? Can you press your button, please? There's no further speakers. I will then go, after Councillor Crawford, I'll go to Councillor Richards, who has a right of a reply, and then we will go to the electronic vote. Councillor Netzinger.
Thank you. I would also like to thank Councillor Richards for bringing this motion, and I'd like to thank Councillor Taylor for her words explaining very much the impact of the lack of a family on care leavers. However, I make no apology for being political in my response to this motion. Politics is all about choices. This council's administration seems to want to shelve responsibility for everything. Under the Brexit debate, we were told that this was a national issue and not for this council. And now Councillor Bywater says we can't even take our responsibilities as corporate parents seriously without a national scheme. Other Conservative councils seem perfectly able to bring forward policies which manage the concerns raised about fairness and about who would be eligible for this scheme. If the Conservative members of this council vote this motion down, they will be making a local political choice not to support Cambridgeshire's care leavers, for whom we have formal parental responsibility. I am deeply disappointed that the political leadership of this council chooses to find £16 million of borrowing for a new office in Alconbury, £13 million to cover the overspend on Ely Bypass, and indeed £400,000 for increases to councillors' allowances, but says it is unable to find the money to support the most vulnerable of young people for whom we have parental responsibility. And I think it's deeply disappointing, and I will be supporting the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Crook.
I would like to suggest that there is a government strategy for this policy. The government's care leavers strategy, called Keep on Caring, was published in July 2016. They encouraged councils to consider the role of corporate parent through a lens of what any reasonable parent does to give their child the best start in life. In relation to this, local authorities were encouraged to consider exempting care leavers from council tax, using the powers already at their disposal. Now, I do not like the ad hominem attack on my colleague, because I feel that she has not disregarded the democratic process. It is perfectly legitimate in the light of new evidence to bring an issue to full council in spite of a decision of the committee when you feel that this issue does need a second look. There have been massive precedents that have already been set. Only on October the 11th, the Scottish Parliament exempted care leavers from council tax. Wales and a third of English councils have done the same thing. Examples of best practice reported by the Children's Society include Birmingham, Wolves, Islington, Herts, Rochdale, Lancashire, and only yesterday, the Tory-run Norfolk County Council passed such a motion. The Children's Society have urgent reasons for wanting exemption for care leavers from council tax. they have found 50% of young people have difficulty avoiding debt when leaving care. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation research shows that accumulation of debt were reasons for non-payment among care leavers of council tax. Rochdale Council did some research. They found that 77% of their care leavers were behind with council tax, and they have found that there have been a reduction in emergency payments to young people. There are serious consequences for young people because if they do not receive their support or are sanctioned from benefits for, say, being late for a meeting at the job centre, they can find themselves without any money, and the council has a lot of expense chasing the council tax. And as Rochdale found, they have had a reduction in emergency payments when they introduced this policy, so it can be a benefit to all. The worst outcome is committal to prison for non-payment, which is a disaster for young people. Care leavers do get benefits, yes. If they're sanctioned, they could find themselves in a lot of difficulty. And I think with the massive precedent in Scotland and Wales and a third of our county councils, I can't see why we can't do it here.
Thank you. Councillor Hoy, just sort of go for it.
Because councillors Bywater and Every said everything that I could have said. They were very logical about the reason behind the CYP decision. But I just can't let Councillor Netzinger's comments go unchallenged, quite frankly. At least Councillor Richards, in what she said, and one, I might not agree, she had the good grace to put her comments across and not make it personal and explain her logic and reasons. But unfortunately, Councillor Netzinger couldn't do that. She felt the need to be personal and unkind and suggest things that were not true and saying that we don't care about care leavers. I did not hear any people at CYP. There are Labour members, there are Liberal Democrat members, there's an independent member, and none of these comments were made. People sat there and voted for it, and they should have made those comments. You have group meetings, you have committee meetings, you wanted this system. Don't pretend you aren't part of it and now come here and not make any comments because it's quite frankly disgraceful.
Thank you. Councillor Richards, would you like, you've got the right to reply. Then we move to an electronic vote on this motion.
I'd like to thank comrades and colleagues who have supported this motion, and have pointed out that other authorities and councils have found a way. Whilst this council is saying it's too complicated, we're not sure how it's going to work, someone might make a complaint. I gave models and I gave examples of how we might move forward here. And thank you for saying I gave my reasons logically. In terms of disadvantaging other groups, I thought that was quite a problematic way of looking at it. If the CYP committee wishes to write for a national scheme to support all vulnerable young people who are financially struggling, I was actually not going to be political, but now I'm forced to be political, who are actually struggling because of Tory austerity, then yes, go ahead. You fight disadvantage wherever you see it. And there is disadvantage and this vulnerable group, and there is a way of supporting them. And to say that £110,000 out of £1 million, millions of pounds budget is too much money to help our kids seems to me extraordinary. But actually, this isn't about party politics. So I'm going to ask Simon Bywater now to agree to work with me on this. Are we honestly not going to do this because it's too difficult or too complicated, or somebody's going to complain? It's the well-being of our children that is at stake. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will now move to the electronic vote. Mrs. Rowe, can you lead us through the voting, please, on the fourth motion?
Would members please press the blue button to indicate they are present? Members in favour of the motion, please press the green button marked plus. Members against the motion, please press the red button marked minus. Members wishing to abstain, please press the yellow button marked with a cross. I'm now closing the vote. Chairman, the result of the vote is 16 votes in favour, 32 against and 5 abstentions. The motion is therefore lost.
Thank you very much. Before I think about lunch, I would like to keep going and see how many questions we've got, if that's okay. Next, we consider item 15A, Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority and Overview and Scrutiny Committee oral questions, which will be dealt with in accordance with the protocol set out in Annex 1 of Part 4.1, Council Procedure, Rules of the Council's Constitution. Members have the annex in front of them on white paper. The generic report summarising the decisions made by the Combined Authority's formal committees is included on the Council agenda on pages 81 to 125. Can I please invite members to ask questions of the Council's representative on the Combined Authority, Councillor Count. Councillor Harrison.
No, I haven't. I've got my arms.
Councillor Dupre.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to ask a question of Councillor Nefsinger relating... Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, we're asking questions of Councillor Count. No questions? Okay. Can I please therefore ask members to ask questions?
Councillor Jenkins. Councillor Jenkins-Button.
Getting into a habit. And I'm actually standing up to say I'm not going to ask a question. Because...
Well, sit down then.
I had alerted Councillor Campbell that I was going to, but having read the rules, I realised I would not be able to ask a question now. So I'll take it up with Steve offline. Okay?
Okay.
Thank you for your reply anyway. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Councillor Jenkins. There are no other members indicating... Can I please therefore invite members to ask questions of the Council's representatives on the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, Councillors Connor and Netzinger. Councillor Dupre.
Thank you, Chair. That's me now then. I'd like to ask Councillor Netzinger a question relating to Appendix 2 and the meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee decision summary of the 24th of September, in particular the section on governance. And my question is that a letter has been published which was sent by the Chief Executives of all the constituent bodies of the Combined Authority except East Cambridgeshire, expressing grave concern about the way the Combined Authority is being managed and the governance of the organisation. What is the Scrutiny Committee doing to ensure the concerns raised by the Chief Executives are taken seriously?
The letter to which you refer was sent by the Chief Executives of all authorities except East Cambridgeshire and including this authority during August. And while I was personally aware of the letter at the time of the most recent Scrutiny Committee, the letter was not at that time in the public domain. Before the last Scrutiny Committee, I tried to get the letter released to members of the committee so that it could inform our discussions about the sudden and unexpected departure of the Chief Executive of the Combined Authority, which also occurred during August. Since that meeting, the letter has been published in the local press and, equally importantly, has been released formally to me as chair of the Scrutiny Committee under FOI regulations, and so we will be discussing it at our next meeting. In the meantime, I have been involved in local government for an embarrassingly long time now, almost 20 years, across 4 different councils in different parts of the country, and I have never in that time come across a letter quite like this from such a wide group of chief executives to a colleague. And I am in no doubt that only enormous frustration could have led this group to write in this way. As you will be aware, the Combined Authority now has 2 joint chief executives, and I'm sure the Scrutiny Committee will be wanting to examine very carefully the issues which were raised in the letter. I understand that following a joint meeting with the officers of the Combined Authority this week that was held between myself and the chair of the Audit and Governance Committee, that the internal auditors of the Combined Authority will be producing a report looking into the governance of the Combined Authority. And I very much welcome the recognition by the Combined Authority that a review is needed. I hope very much that the new officer leadership of the Combined Authority can bring a different operational culture to the organisation with a much more open and collaborative way of working. We all need the Combined Authority to be able to focus on its role in bringing forward a step change in the provision of affordable housing in Cambridgeshire. and alongside that, a transport plan which can support the high level of economic growth which Cambridgeshire continues to experience. Both of these critical tasks require councils to work together across district and county boundaries. The recent conflict and frustration between leadership of the combined authority...
Have you got much more to finish?
No, I've got half a sentence. The recent frustration between the leadership of the combined authority and its constituent councils has slowed rather than facilitated this delivery, and I hope very much that the change of leadership at the top of the officer structure will help make a different...
Thank you. Councillor Tierney.
I'm sorry I didn't give you advance notice, Councillor Connor, but these things happen quite quickly. I was at the Overview and Scrutiny Committee at Fenland District Council yesterday, and the Chief Executive was asked about the letter that has been referred to, and his comments were that he felt it had been blown out of all proportion, overblown and misused by the press, and I wondered if you wanted to add anything to that comment.
It certainly has been blown by all proportion, really. I think the Mayor should be getting on with his job and not being overcritical with him. That's my view. And I think that was happened at the Overseeing Scrutiny last panel. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no further speakers on this item. We now move to 15B. I propose to take questions on the Fire Authority issues. This will be dealt with in accordance with the guidelines agreed by the Council. Members have a summary of these in front of them on white paper. The report from the Fire Authority is included on the Council agenda on pages 126 to 127. Can I please ask if there are any questions for the Fire Authority? I take that as no. We now move on to 15C, written questions. Responses to the 7 written questions received have been provided to the political groups before the meeting and published on the Council's website. That does conclude the business on the agenda for today. Can I thank members for their contribution?
Hold on.